bus or train. She don't, but she won't explain. Oh, 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 and Ruby still never did come to say why he would not stay. Oh, that was just his way. She told me it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You forget about the one, oh, who forgot about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby, yeah, she gonna show up late. I know I just have to wait. I love her, that's my fate. She told me it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You forget about the one, oh, who forgot about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby, yeah, you make my heart sing. For you, I would do anything. Baby, why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring? Honey, why won't you wear my ring? Forgot about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby, yeah, you make my heart sing. For you, I would do anything. Baby, why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring? My side of the story goes something like this. I was minding my own business like I do, but she was cherry red and fine, born in 1959. White ball tires and a rag top roof. Lord, Lord, a T-bird with a rag top roof. Yeah, my face reflected pale in all of that shiny chrome for sale. Price tag of 45 large. I was thinking, well, hell, I got some jewelry I could sell. So I pulled out my old MasterCard. Lord, Lord, I slapped down my plastic on that car. And I slid behind the wheel, put that pedal to the steel, cruised out to the 401. Yeah, that leather tuck and roll surely satisfied my soul. I was having way too much fun, burning down a 401. His side of the story goes something like this. Well, he heard me out, but he was not pleased. Said a husband should have say in any major purchase made. Well, I just smiled and handed him the keys. Lord, Lord, but one ride is worth 1,000 words from me. Yeah, and he slid behind the wheel, put that pedal to the steel, cruised out to the 401. Yeah, that leather tuck and roll must have satisfied his soul. We were having way too much fun, burning down the 401, burning down the 401. sweet gray mouse in my house, stealing from my table. A sticky little louse of a mouse, making me unstable. I see I'll poison him with lying fat. But the wife says no, no, no to such a horrible act. She then suggests instead that we find a cat. Well, who am I to argue that? Found a pretty little calico cat, gone feral in the street. A pretty kitty cat, fast as a flash, shiny claws on her feet. She
Is Louis coming as well, or
he need not
you got to
fear.
cancel? Yeah.
She was no threat, and she made that clear.
Yep.
But when he leaned in close, so he could hear, she snapped his wee little neck, so insincere.
Cool. Also gives you guys a break too.
My whining wife, she's the bane of my life. If not for her dead weight, I'd be alright. When she was young, her eyes, they shone so bright. Now she's dim as a dag on a sheep on a moonless night. She's never happy with her lot, not for a single thing she's got. I'd trade her in as soon as not find someone new to warm my cart. Now there's a new gray mouse in a house, sitting on my table, but not a rat or a cat or a spouse. I'm too unstable. It's not the mouse, the cat, or the aging wife. I find a flaw in every aspect of my life. Why should I look within to seek the truth? I'd rather point my finger, and now I blame you, and you,
Cute.
and you, and you, and you.
You can't see anything. Okay. Yeah, you can have a ring for anything if you want. That's why we brought in the pads of paper too, just to give you with an idea. Just write it down. You can see it on camera.
So having said that, in the spirit of the show,
Come ride with me on my Palomino, my amigo, go wherever the wind blows us, under the sun and over the snow. We will ride through all kinds of weather. Together we'll be happy forever.
I had sort of thought about
Just you
And the late
I,
Barry Penner is right on time.
and me. We don't need a saddle or a bridle to guide
Well, I
him.
was thinking when John was here.
It just
Take
is.
us where we wanna go, no matter how
God
far.
said about Mark.
And when the sky is dark, we won't have to worry, my amigo. Goldie knows his way by heart back home to his barn. Come ride with me on my Palomino, my amigo.
As much as my
I'll take
ex
you where I
got her inheritance, I got the cat. I also got her mom's original 10-year-old iPad.
We will ride
All is not lost. This comes in handy.
calling horizon.
This was one of the original ones.
You can just close your eyes when the light is too bright to
Thank you, Moss Suter.
We
Could have used some of the money, but that's okay.
or a
When my hand
bridle
comes up, I was going to
guide
run
him. He will take us where we want to go, no matter how far. And when the sky is dark, we won't have to worry, my amigo. Goldie knows his way by heart back home to his barn. Come with me on my golden pony, on his back. Oh, so warm we'll be. Just hold on tight to his mane so wide. This world's alright with your arms around me. You'll see. Come ride with me on my Palomino, my amigo. Go wherever the wind blows us, under the sun and over the snow. We will ride out to the calling horizon. You can just close your eyes when the light is too bright to behold. Ruby dear loves to walk in the rain. She could take a bus or train. She don't, but she won't explain. Oh, 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 and Ruby dear never did come to say why he would not stay. Oh, that was just his way. She told me it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You forget about the one, oh, who forgot about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby, yeah, she gonna show up late. I know I just have to wait. I love her, that's my fate. She told me it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You forget about the one, oh, who forgot about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby, yeah, you make my heart sing. For you, I would do anything. Baby, why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring? Honey, why won't you wear my ring? Now I know it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You forget about the one, oh, who forgot about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby, yeah, you make my heart sing. For you, I would do anything. Baby, why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring? Yeah, well, my side of the story goes something like this. I was minding my own business like I do, but she was cherry red and fine, born in 1959, white ball tires and a rag top roof. Lord, Lord, a T-bird with a rag top roof. Yeah, my face reflected pale in all of that shiny chrome for sale. Price tag of 45 large. I was thinking, well, hell, I got some jewelry I could sell. So I pulled out my old MasterCard. Lord, Lord, I slapped down my plastic on that car. And I slid behind the wheel, put that pedal to the the steel, cruised out to the 401. Yeah, that leather tuck and roll surely satisfied my soul. I was having way too much fun, burning down the 401. His side of the story goes something like this. Well, he heard me out, but he was not pleased. Said a husband should have say in any major purchase made. Well, I just smiled and handed him the keys. Lord, Lord, one ride is worth 1,000 words from me. Yeah, and he slid behind the wheel, put that pedal to the steel, cruised out to the 401. Yeah, that leather tuck and roll must have satisfied his soul. We were having way too much fun, burning down the 401, burning down the 401. Slid behind the wheel, put that pedal to the steel, cruised out to the 401. Yeah, that leather tuck and roll surely satisfies the soul. We were having way too much fun, burning down the 401, burning down the 401. We love a Ford, we can't afford. We love a Ford, we can't afford. We love a Ford, Lord, Lord, we can't afford. Oh, no. There's a weak gray mouse in my house, stealing from my table. A sticky little louse of a mouse, making me unstable. I see I'll poison him with a lying fat. But the wife says no, no, no to such a horrible act. She then suggests instead that we find a cat. Well, who am I to argue that? Found a pretty little calico cat, gone feral in the street. A pretty kitty cat, fast as a flash, shiny claws on her feet. She whispered to our mouse he need not fear. She was no threat, and she made that clear. But when he leaned in close so he could hear, she snapped his wee little neck, so insincere. shining wife. She's the bane of my life. If not for her dead weight, I'd be alright. When she was young, her eyes, they shone so bright. Now she's dim as a dag on a sheep on a moonless night. She's never happy with her lot, not for a single thing she's got. I'd trade her in as soon as not find someone new to warm my cot. Now there's a new gray mouse in a house, sitting on my table, but not a rat or a cat or a spouse. I'm too unstable. It's not the mouse, the cat, or the aging wife. I find a flaw in every aspect of my life. Why should I look within to seek the truth? I'd rather point my finger, and now I blame you, and you, and you, and you, and you. Come ride with me on my Palomino, my amigo, go wherever the wind blows us, under the sun and over the snow. We will ride through all kinds of weather. Together we'll be happy forever. Just you and my pony and me. We don't need a saddle or a bridle to guide him. He will take us where we wanna go, no matter how far. And when the sky is dark, we won't have to worry, my amigo. Goldie knows his way by heart back home to his barn. Come ride with me on my Palomino, my amigo. I'll take you where I go. In all of our days still to come, we will ride out to the calling horizon. You can just close your eyes when the light is too bright to behold. We don't need a saddle or a bridle to guide him. He will take us where we wanna go, no matter how far. And when the sky is dark, we won't have to worry, my amigo. Goldie knows his way by heart back home to his barn. Come with me on my golden pony, on his back. Oh, so warm we'll be. Just hold on tight to his mane so wide. This world's alright with your arms around me. You'll see. Come ride with me on my Palomino, my amigo. Go wherever the wind blows us, under the sun and over the snow. We will ride out to the calling horizon. You can just close your eyes when the light is too bright to behold. bus or train. She don't, but she won't explain. Oh, 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 and Ruby's dear never did come to say why he would not stay. Ooh, that was just his way. She told me it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You forget about the one, oh, who forgot about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby, yeah, she gonna show up late. I know I just have to wait. I love her, that's my fate. She told me it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You forget about the one, oh, who forgot about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby, yeah, you make my heart sing. For you, I would do anything. Baby, why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring? Honey, why won't you wear my ring? Now I know it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You forget about the one, oh, who forgot about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby, yeah, you make my heart sing. For you, I would do anything. Baby, why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring?
And good evening and welcome to chillTV's extensive coverage of election 2019. Chilliwack votes, Fraser Valley votes, Canada votes, and we're going to find out just where we are heading when it comes to this rather interesting 40-day campaign. Now, the polls have closed for all but the West Coast, and we will be keeping you up to date on what is happening. Right now, we're still a half an hour away before British Columbia polls close, and for Chilliwack Hope, we still have 30 minutes for people to vote, whether it is for the People's Party with Rob Bogunovic, Arthur Green with the Greens, the Christian Heritage Party with Daniel Lamache, Heather McQuillan with the NDPs, Dorothy Jean O'Donnell with the Marxist-Leninist, Kelly Valonis with the Liberals, and Mark Strahl, the incumbent MP for Chilliwack Hope. We will also be keeping an eye on the two other Fraser Valley ridings. That includes Abbotsford as well as Mission, Matsqui, and the Fraser Canyon. Some of the other ridings we're also going to have an eye on is what will happen in Vancouver-Granville. Now that is Judy Wilson-Raybould, the now ex-Liberal, who wants to sit as an independent, and this is all because of the SNC Lavalin affair. We'll also, if you want to call it comedy relief, we'll keep an eye on the riding of Beauce. The People's Party of Canada leader, Maxime Bernier, is running, trying to get back into Parliament as an MP. The thing there is another Maxime Bernier who's running for the Rhinoceros Party. So if you want to call that comedy relief, we'll take a look at it. Right now, the Liberals across the country are leading in 25 seats, the Conservatives with 6, the Bloc with 1, the Green Party with 1, and one other one. So far, 34 seats. There are 338 seats up for grabs. 170 is the majority. So now we're going to get down to it and start dissecting this, what should be a rather interesting evening with our panel featuring Barry Penner and Clint Hames.
Well, thanks, Don, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to chillTV and Canada Chooses. As part of our election night coverage, I'm joined by Clint Hames, a familiar face to most Chilliwackians.
Welcome.
Our former mayor. Of course, you've already met Don Lane, our anchor of chillTV News of the Week. And throughout the evening, we're going to be joined by a variety of notable locals who will join us to discuss what's happening here locally, regionally, provincially, and nationally. So throughout the evening, we'll be joined by a few other people to keep Clint and I on our toes. We're privileged to be able to share this election night, as I said, with a number of guests. Diana Jansen, I believe, has just joined us here at the studio. We'll see her shortly. We're expecting later this evening to be joined by John Less, another
Former mayor?
former mayor.
Absolutely.
We seem to grow a few of those around here. And also Willow Richel, who's a current school trustee for the city of Chilliwack. Should be an exciting evening. Or will it, Clint? Do you expect a nail biter, or what are we going to see?
I think it'll come down to the wire. I don't think anybody's going to run away with this early. I think everybody expects certain things to fall into place, and we're seeing already some of those things. The Liberals have always been very strong in the Maritimes, and that seems to be playing out. And as they move through the country, I think Southern Ontario will tell us a lot, and British Columbia is going to tell us a lot tonight.
We're starting to see the early results coming in. I think the Liberals are doing reasonably well in the Maritimes. Of course, up against their result in 2015, it's pretty hard to compare, as they swept, I think, 40 out of 40 seats.
Correct, and I think they're probably looking at, realistically, coming down from that a little bit, and that seems to be playing out with the Conservatives. Looks like they've picked up about 6 seats out that way, and we'll see how that goes as the evening progresses. It's very early, so it's hard to say this is what's happening, but right now they're projecting about 37 seats currently for the Liberals, 7 for the Conservatives. The NDP seem to have picked up 3 seats, Bloc 1 and the Green 1. So
I think what we're starting to see is the early results are coming in from what here on the West Coast we call Eastern Canada, but really I guess it's Central Canada to them. That would be Ontario and Quebec. The polls have just closed. And you'll see numbers bouncing around, I guess, for some time as they're very early results, just a handful of votes being counted in those 2 provinces, but it can influence the numbers that people will see being reported.
certainly, and this riding's always been not much of a nail-biter. We've traditionally been fairly conservative, or whatever party is espousing kind of conservative philosophy at that point in time. I did some research as we prepared for this evening, and I wanted to go back because I remember becoming politically active in about the middle 1960s as I was becoming aware and growing up. And of course, in 1968 there was Trudeau-mania, and I've followed politics very closely ever since then. But I thought there might be some interest in people watching, especially local folks, to go back and look at the last 50 years in a fairly quickly. I'm not going to be here all night doing this, but to look at the last 50 years and try to pull out some of the real interesting things that have happened in this riding. Although the outcome is rarely in doubt in the Chilliwack riding, there have been some very, very interesting stories. I think back in 1965, I'll start there. I'll just a quick snapshot. In 1965, the riding looked like this. About 30% of the people here were conservative, and in those days, that was handled often by the Social Credit Party. We had a federal Social Credit Party, and they represented the riding. So gathering up the Conservatives and the Socreds, that was about 30%. The Liberals always sat at about 30%, and the new NDP, or what was formerly by another name, CCF, was polling at about 30%. And in 1968, things really changed in this riding, and a lot of it had to do with Trudeau-mania, which was happening throughout the country. But the other thing that happened in this riding was we had been represented by a Social Credit Party for many years, and the Conservative Party was starting to make inroads in the West. And the Conservative Party had ran a fairly strong candidate in Chilliwack, along with the traditional Social Credit candidate, whose name was Alex Patterson, that lots of folks in Chilliwack will remember. And what happened was that Conservative vote split, and during a time of Trudeau-mania, we had a farmer named Jerry Pringle, who was a very well thought of and very well known farmer in Chilliwack, who snuck up the middle and won the riding, the first and only time in the last 50 years where the riding's been represented by a Liberal.
And federal Liberals have been talking about that ever since.
I think they have. It's brought up at every meeting. We remember 1968.
Remember Jerry Pringle?
And of course, what happened as a result of that, which I think is really interesting, is Alex Patterson, at the time in 1968, another interesting fact was, Alex Patterson was actually the leader of the Federal Social Credit Party. So we actually had a national leader of a party representing or running in our riding at that time. Well, along comes 1972, and Alex Patterson is now a Conservative, and they have amalgamated the Conservative vote, and Alex Patterson won the 1972 election here quite handily over Jerry Pringle, and we returned to a Conservative seat, and it's been Conservative, small c Conservative, ever since that time. In 1980, Alex Patterson was reelected, and he received about 49% of the vote, and I just want you to remember that as we move through here. In 84, the Liberals were reduced in Canada. You probably remember this election to 39 seats. It was one of their lowest showings ever. And of course, Chilliwack once again voted to send a Conservative there.
To join Brian Mulroney and his large Conservative caucus in Ottawa.
That's correct. And in 1984, I think comes one of the more interesting, in 1983, 1984, the most interesting times in Chilliwack's political history, because after what seemed like 1,000 years, Alex Patterson decided he was going to retire. And because we're such a Conservative riding, and I'm speaking small c Conservative riding, whoever took over that position, whoever got the nomination, was of course going to be crowned the MP. So there was a huge interest in that Conservative nomination meeting in 1984. Let me give you a list of some of the people that put their names forward at that time. The current Matsqui mayor, Harry de Jong, because it was a riding that took in Abbotsford as well at that time. The current Abbotsford mayor, George Ferguson, who we all remember George. The former mayor, Jeff Clark from Chilliwack. Simon Gibson, who was a councillor for the city of Abbott, or for what was then the district of Matsqui. Fred Tunbridge, who was an alderman in Chilliwack. And Neil Brown, a lawyer from Abbotsford, very prominent lawyer from Abbotsford, along with a number of other folks. There was a huge list. And what's interesting is that the Conservative Party in the riding sold 7,000 memberships for that 1984 meeting. And when they finally had their nomination meeting, there were over 2,700 people that signed up and came to that nomination meeting. It was held in the Coliseum in Chilliwack, the old Chilliwack Coliseum, and at that time it was the largest riding nomination meeting ever held in Canada.
Well, if you can believe it, Clint, in 1984, I was still in high school. I was in grade 12, and we were not immune to the political excitement. You might know Canada's new ambassador to China, Mr. Barton, Dominic Barton, originally from Chilliwack. He was prominent in the Young Conservatives, tiny Tories, we called them back then.
Yeah.
And he and his brother started selling memberships throughout the high school, and memberships were being sold. So that's how they got to those numbers of 7,000 overall. It was virtually everybody in Chilliwack knew somebody who was getting involved in one of those camps. I think there were there 12 candidates?
I think there's probably at least 12. I can't remember all together.
It went many ballots.
Went 5 ballots. Went five ballots, and the eventual winner was a man named Ross Belcher. And Ross was the manager of the Eaton's department store in Abbotsford, very well connected through the religious community in Abbotsford, and had signed up many people from Abbotsford. And there was a lot of discussion at the time that this was really an Abbotsford versus Chilliwack, and it came down to Neil Brown, the lawyer, and Ross Belcher, and they fought it out. And in the end, Ross Belcher won. His vote total stayed fairly steady the whole time. And he picked up a few votes here and there. Most of the other 12 went to Neil Brown, but in the end, he couldn't get it done. And Ross became our MP, as was expected, and served in that capacity for
2 terms.
Yeah, quite some time. I think interestingly, at the time when the Reform Party came in, which I believe was 1993, 93, the Reform Party was formed. And you'll remember that was kind of a Western alienation party that started in the West and said, we're sick of Central Canada. We want an elected Senate, and We want better representation. And it was kind of a fringe party at that time. It felt like it. But they came in 1993, and they reduced Belcher's vote count down to 40% at that time. He still won, but that first run of the Reform
that was
Party in Chilliwack.
1988.
That was 88? Sorry, yes.
1988.
Yes, 1988. They got 2% of the vote, but then, and then in 1993, it was reduced then to a much lower total.
And do you remember who became the MP after 1993?
In 1993, it was a gentleman named Strahl, I believe.
Mr. Strahl Sr. Yes, Chuck
when
Strahl.
Chuck Strahl won the election at that time, running under the Reform banner. And when he announced his nomination, or his nomination was announced, people's eyebrows raised. But that was the time when the Conservative Party nationally went way down in its rankings. There was, I believe, the odd scandal, and Kim Campbell led the Conservative Party from a government to 2 seats at that time.
Just 2 seats.
Which is quite, I don't expect anything like that's going to happen tonight, but it shows you that politics is a very, very interesting game. In 97, one of our guests tonight was a candidate in the 1997 federal election. John Less ran for the Liberals with a respectable 22% in the riding at that time. The Liberal Party was under Mr. Martin, Paul Martin, and was really drawing votes from the left and the right.
Actually, 1997?
Yeah.
They were still Jean Chrétien.
Was it? Oh, you're right.
The finance minister did come here at the time, Paul Martin. I
That's
remember
correct.
him coming to support
Okay.
John Less in that campaign.
So there we are. Mr. Strahl, Chuck, got 62% of the vote that election and did remarkably well. The Reform Party in the riding, that was, I think overall, they did extremely well in 1997 in the country. And by the time 2000 came around, the Reform Party had become the Canadian Alliance. And in 2004, they became the Conservative Party. And in our riding, of course, we've been represented by Strahls since that time. Chuck was successful in 2006 with 56% of the vote.
Right.
Successful in 2008 with 62% of the vote. And his son took over in 2011, Mark, our current MP, with 57% of the vote. And last year was kind of an interesting...
2015.
Sorry, 2015. No, 2011, Mark was his first
time, yes.
First time. He had 57% of the vote.
But the last time out was...
But the last time out was 2015 with 42% of the vote. And I thought that was an interesting election because it was one of the highest vote totals since Jerry Pringle for a Liberal. That was Louis Dieger ran in that election. Was a very popular restaurateur in Chilliwack, very well known. And it was sort of Trudeau-mania version 2. Right. And the Liberals pulled very, very well. And of course, they got quite a majority in Parliament. So in that election, the 2005 election, Mark received 42% of the vote. But Louis' total was 34%. And that's
the strongest showing since Jerry Pringle.
That's it. Yes, it is. And all the old Liberals will tell you that.
It is.
Jerry Pringle. So I had a trivia question for you, Barry. I already mentioned that Alex Patterson was a leader of a national party. Chilliwack has had one other leader of a national party run in the federal election. Who was it?
I don't know.
Now you have to think hard. It was Ron Gray. Ron Gray was the leader of the Christian Heritage Party and ran in the Chilliwack riding. And there was an almost leader of a party because at one point Chuck Strahl took a group of 6 Reform Party, or actually it was Canadian Alliance Party members, and they formed their own caucus in government as a protest to Stockwell Day. And he was the leader of that caucus in government. They had actually left the Canadian Alliance, and then shortly after, everybody was friends again, and they all came together. Remember that?
Right. I'm trying to remember the name. Was it the Democratic Reform Alliance?
Uh-oh. We'll find it. I'll find it in one of the breaks, and I'll let you know. So that was, I think, another very interesting thing for our community, because Chuck was a very highly regarded member of Parliament, and as mayor, of course, I got to meet with him lots of times, and got to meet with him in Ottawa, where he was well respected on both sides, or all sides of the aisles, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, there was actually some consideration for Chuck running to become the leader of the Canadian Alliance as they were looking towards a leadership. In the end, he said no, but
wisely.
there was a lot of pressure for him to run in that election. So I think there's, while the outcome is rarely in doubt in our elections in this riding, I think the stories are still there, and there's lots of very interesting stories about how we get there. I think there's also lots of interesting stories going to play out tonight. I'm looking forward to seeing how the numbers fall out. Maybe we can give a bit of an update here on where we're seeing on television right now.
Yeah, we have, of course, Don Lane here with us tonight. He's been following the results coming in across the country and following some interesting races in British Columbia, although, of course, our polls, I don't believe, have closed just yet. Don, can you bring us up to date on what you're seeing?
Yeah, numbers are starting to roll in a little more fast and furious now as polls have closed everywhere across the country except for British Columbia, and we're at 6:48 Pacific time, so another 12 minutes away from that. So what we are looking at right now is the Liberals have 54 seats either leading or elected, the Conservatives with 37, the Bloc with 9, that's now up to 11, the New Democrats 6, and the Green Party 1. We were talking about this off air with tongue-in-cheek about the Rhinoceros Party with Maxime Bernier running in the same riding as the People's Party of Canada's leader, Maxime Bernier. Both of them are not doing well right now, and it's, again, very early, 5 of 242 polls. But the Conservatives, Richard Laroux, is now leading with 42% of the vote in Maxime Bernier's backyard. So we're going to keep an eye on that. Did the PPC fall down? Did it blow up? Again, it's still very, very early. We're just getting an update now, and it's still, yes, 42% of the vote going Conservative in Maxime Bernier's riding, and Bernier right now is sitting in second place, a distant second place in that riding. Obviously, after 7 o'clock when the polls close here, we'll keep an eye on what's going to happen with the Chilliwack Hope riding. Will Mark Stroll stay on as MP? Also, we'll take a look at Abbotsford. Ed Fast, is that a safe seat or not? We'll take a look. Also, there's been some controversy with Mission Matsqui and the Fraser Canyon. We don't know if that will stay Liberal with Jadis Sadu. Will Brad Viss take over? Again, we simply have to be patient. Right now on a national scope, we're looking at, again, 58 seats for the Liberals, 39 for the Conservatives. The Bloc has 12, NDP 8, the Greens with 1, none for the People's Party of Canada. And we're also going to keep a close eye after 7 o'clock and after the polls close. Will Judy Wilson-Raybould be elected as an independent instead of sitting as a Liberal in Vancouver-Granville? So we're starting to see these numbers roll in again. With 338 seats all told, you need 170 to have a majority. We still don't know if it'll be a majority or a minority government, and that's how this evening will play out. So Barry and Clint, back to you.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate that update. Interesting to see that Maxime Bernier, the leader of the Canadian People's Party, is behind the Conservatives. I know Andrew Scheer, the Conservative leader, took some criticism from certain quarters for spending a day to go to that riding and focus on just one seat, but I think Conservatives will be quite happy if they can pick that one up. They're going to need all the seats they can get, but that one will be especially precious, given that Maxime Bernier, of course, had been a Conservative and then left the party and has been a thorn in their side.
Yeah, you always want your leader elected. That's an important part of politics, is to get the leader elected. It shows a confidence in the party, and have your leader not sitting there is going to be difficult. I think they have a tough row to hoe anyway. I'm not sure that if Maxime Bernier is going down to defeat, I'm not sure they've got a stronger candidate in the field, but we'll see. Even locally here, Rob Bogdanovic is a very well-known, very articulate fellow, and we'll see how that plays out.
Now, Clint, we were talking about some of the historical results here in the Eastern Fraser Valley federally. Let's go back a little bit further. You were telling me about a time when it was a very close race in 4 directions?
Yeah, it's interesting. 1962 seems to have been. I've tried to go back and look at some of the historical records, some of the newspaper articles from that time. But the election in 1962 in this riding was one of the closest races we've ever had for all 4 candidates: the Liberals, the NDP, The Progressive Conservatives and the Social Credit Party all ran candidates in that election. Some people might remember a gentleman, I think he lived up in Promontory. His name was Walter Ferguson, lived in the Chilliwack area, had a lot to do with education. He ran for the Liberals. William Hartley, I'm not sure who William was
I think better known as Bill Hartley.
Bill Hartley?
Yes.
Could be, yeah. Bill Hartley ran for the NDP. The Progressive Conservatives were represented by a gentleman named Harold Hicks. And Harold actually won the 1957 election as a Progressive Conservative here, beating Alex Patterson. And Patterson came back and won the next election. And Alex Patterson, of course, was the Social Credit member. And here's the numbers for that. The Liberals received 8,357, the NDP 8,896, the Progressive Conservatives 8,572, and the Socreds 9,970. So Alex Patterson squeaked out an election victory in 1962, but it was, in political terms, it was very close.
Now that's remarkable because you look at those numbers, that means the NDP came second in this riding.
That's correct.
They were second place finishers in that. Bill Hartley, and by the way, there was another Bill Hartley elected from Maple Ridge. I served in the BC legislature with him. He's a different Bill Hartley.
Okay.
I remember asking him about that, and I don't believe there was any relation.
And a little bit of trivia about Alex Patterson. His full name was actually Alexander Bell Patterson, so named after Alexander Graham Bell. And he represented the riding with some distinction for quite some time. I think as we look at these numbers coming in, Barry, I wonder, in my mind, one of the things that I've been contemplating is what's going to be the impact of the People's Party of Canada in our riding. In some ridings, they're dragging people reluctantly in to be candidates. In our riding, we had a fairly well-known and very articulate candidate. And in some of this historical record, you can see the impact of splitting the right vote in there. And any thoughts on whether you think that right vote may split in this riding and the impact it might have?
Based on our history over the last few decades, you would say of any part of Canada where the People's Party might pick up some momentum, you think it could be here in the Fraser Valley, typically referred to traditionally as kind of a Bible Belt, conservative views, small c conservative. But of course, those demographics can change. And as we saw in 2015, the federal Liberals got almost 40% of the vote here, upper 30s. So maybe the demographics are changing. One thing that is interesting, and I did have a chance to interview their candidate here for the People's Party a couple of weeks ago here on chillTV. Interesting to point out that their position on marketing boards is not probably one that's well received by our local dairy and chicken farmers.
That's correct. They're one of the planks in their platform has always been reluctance to accept the notion of government interference in the marketplace in the form of marketing boards, and that's not a message that would play very well here. It's a question I'd like to, when John Less comes later this evening, it's a question I'd like to pose to him. He's been a farmer and he's been a proponent and supporter of marketing boards and served on a number of boards and commissions in an agricultural capacity. I'd like to get his take on that question. I think something else from my perspective that will be interesting as we watch tonight is, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but the NDP had to bring in a candidate. There was nobody came forward in this riding as an NDP candidate. I'm not sure what the dynamics were, but I think there was a sense that, it's a tough riding to run in, and they brought somebody in. And I wasn't aware of a lot of campaigning by that person in the riding. What's the impact going to be if the NDP vote isn't motivated or is resentful of having a parachuted candidate?
I guess we'll see when the results come in. She was one of the few candidates I was not able to interview here on chillTV. I was able to interview all the candidates for the major parties except for her. I guess scheduling travel from Vancouver was difficult for her. I understand that it's now time for chillTV to break to a commercial and hear from our sponsors.
love you, man. You know, it's good reconnecting, but I think we're done.
Well, yeah, listen. I'll tell you right now, this is going to be the good one. I will produce the show myself. There'll be nothing you guys need
There's
to
no
do.
budget. How can you, there's no...
I'll do producing. I will run the TriCaster. I'll do the sound.
How did I get a microphone on me? What are you doing? What are you doing?
It's taped. I'll do the sound. Look at this, my microphone. Look at this right here. Golden microphone right here.
Why am I mic'd? What is going on here?
Well, this one.
Are those cameras?
Work. They are. They are.
Are you recording us
Welcome
right
to
now?
the first episode. This is the pilot.
What the hell are you talking about?
I'm telling you right now.
Are those cue cards?
These are cue cards.
What are you doing right
So
now?
welcome to the show, by the way.
This is the
Oh,
show.
my leg's caught.
And welcome back to chillTV's coverage of the federal election and our local reaction. Good evening. I'm Don Lane from chillTV in the news anchor desk. And the polls have now closed throughout the country, and we're seeing some interesting numbers roll in. And right now, nationally, the Liberals are leading or have elected in 100 seats, with the Conservatives at 70, the Bloc Québécois at 18, the New Democrats at 9, the Greens at 2. One riding we've been keeping an eye on, and it's starting to tighten up a little bit, and that is the riding in Quebec of Beauce. That is where the People's Party of candidate party leader Maxime Bernier was behind for quite some time, starting to catch up a little bit, but the Conservatives are still leading that particular riding with over 34% of the vote. Richard Leroux is leading Maxime Bernier by about 210, 220 votes. Again, we will keep an eye on that particular riding. Obviously, for the Fraser Valley, will Mark Strahl return as MP for Chilliwack Hope? Also, will Ed Fast return as MP for Abbotsford? We'll also keep an eye on what may be a shift with Mission, Matsqui, Fraser Canyon. Will it stay Liberal? Will it go to the Conservatives? Obviously, the party leaders will be something that we'll be keeping an eye on. And also, in our part of the neighborhood, the riding of Vancouver-Granville. Judy Wilson-Raybould left the Liberals after the SNC-Lavalin affair to run as an independent. Now, we should, and we're only hoping now, that with the polls now closing on the West Coast, we should have some solid numbers within the next half hour. We'll have a full update in 30 minutes time, but if anything breaks, we will definitely keep you up to date. So what we're going to do now is get you back to our panel with Barry Penner, Clint Hames, Diane Jansen, and a cast of many. It is going to be one of those long nights. So Barry Penner, Clint Hames, back to you.
Great. It's thanks, Don, for that update. It looks like the Liberals are pulling ahead. And to viewers that are paying attention, you might realize we've just been joined by Diane Jansen, another former city councillor.
Glad to be here.
School board chair as well.
And school board chair, lest we forget. And Diane also has the remarkable history of having run for federal office here
Yes, I
in our
have.
community. So she comes with that perspective. Tell us about that. What year did you run for the federal Liberals?
Well, I ran in 2011, and just in case Canadians think that Canadian politics is boring, it isn't. There are wild swings, particularly on the center left. So in that election, the Liberals went from 77 seats to 34. They just got clobbered. And in fact, they were no longer the official opposition. They had the NDP had 103 seats because that was also the election where the Orange Crush happened. So
With Jack Layton as their leader.
absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, it's very interesting. What you learn when you run locally is that you can run on your own reputation and on your own hard work. When you run at a provincial or federal level, the leader and the party really drives the agenda. And I mean, we've seen that in this election as well.
I think it's very, very accurate when you describe elections, especially today, that it seems to be more and more about the leader than it does about the local candidate. I look at the list of people that have run in this riding over the years, and there's some amazing people, but if the leadership isn't quite what folks are looking for, and that's what gets focused on, it can really be a challenge. I wanted to ask you, how did you spend election day when you ran? Was that kind of like, okay, it's all I got, I'm going to just relax, or were you out busy? What did election day
Well,
look like for you?
I was going door to door. I mean, if I had judged what I should have weighed by the time I was done with door to door, I would have been 100 pounds soaking wet. But you know, we were really pounding the pavement and getting out there right till the 11th hour, and I think that's what people who are trying to earn the public's vote should be doing, is being very active right to the end.
So on election day itself, you're out door knocking?
Yep, right. I was in Yarrow, my wonderful neighborhood of Yarrow.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
This election, more than others that I remember, seems to have focused on each part, or the two major parties, trying to land knockout punches with the leaders. So it's become about the leaders. And you know, I remember the ads about somebody's credentials. Did they misstate their credentials when they were
Right.
in business, or did they go to a party and maybe do something inappropriate, and without getting into those issues? More than ever before, it's become about that. What are your thoughts about where it was in 2011? Did it feel like that as well, or do you feel like it's changed?
Well, there are certain aspects which I think are the same. So one of the very effective things that the Conservatives did with the Liberals in 2011, you'll remember, is the ads that he's not from here.
This is when your leader was Mr. Ignatieff.
That's right. So, and there were those ads of him coming down the escalator, and I'll tell you that really resonated with people. So I think there's always been that kind of a thing. This election, I think, discouragingly, the important issues have not been talked about. One of them is the fact that we have a $768 billion deficit. Debt, sorry, and what we've got are people piling on. I think if you started, you know, listening to the dizzying numbers of $80 billion worth of promises, you think who's going to pay for it? And the parties say, well, the 1% are going to pay for it. Well, they've run out of the 1% a long time ago. Who's going to get hit? The middle class is going to get hit. Your children are going to get hit. Your kids are going to get hit, because if you look at the trajectory of Canadian debt, it's right up there. So we didn't talk about fiscal responsibility much at all. We didn't even talk about big issues like homelessness. 235,000 people in Canada are homeless. We have an opioid crisis we have not yet fixed. Nobody has fixed it in North America. So I think there were some issues that were absolutely left off the table. In healthcare, a lot of talk about pharmacare, but no discussion about the fact that 3.5 million Canadians do not have a doctor. So while we're talking about blackface, brownface, what somebody said 15 years ago, and whose credentials and who's a dual citizen, we're not talking about that other stuff.
That's right.
To be fair, we did ask that question. I'd asked that question about the deficit and spending plans of two of the federal candidates, Mark Strahl and Kelly Valonis for the Liberals. And what I asked was, are the parties responding to the public? Does the public no longer worry about governments digging deeper financial holes and then someday having to pay that back? And the answers I got were along the lines of, from Mark Strahl, of course, we'll take our time, but we'll get there to balance the budget and not spend quite as much as the federal Liberals. And Ms. Valonis' answer was, well, their measure now will, contrary to 2015 when Justin Trudeau promised to balance the budget, she says now their goal is not to do that, but to try and maintain the debt to GDP ratio at a certain percentage, but to continue to borrow, even though we're at very good times.
Interesting. I think Don interviewed Heather McQuillan to talk about the NDP's plans for poverty and homelessness. I think we have that clip of that interview. Maybe we could run that, and I could get your thoughts, Diane,
Sure.
on what Heather was saying to our intrepid reporter, Don Lane, when he interviewed her. Are we good with that clip?
Don Lane, chillTV News with Heather McQuillan of the NDP candidate. Housing, probably one of the flashpoint issues in the Chilliwack area. How is the NDP going to address that should you form the next government?
Well, we have a commitment to building 500,000 affordable housing units in the next 10 years. We are going to implement taxes on the top 1% of our earners in Canada. Really, it's a multifaceted problem, and it has to do with income levels that haven't matched the rise in housing. So we're going to commit to $15 an hour minimum wage. We're going to implement structures that make sure people are taken care of so that they can look at their financial stability. No one can do that when you're dealing with mental health issues or poverty or, poor nutrition. Those things all come into it. And so while we do believe that those 500,000 units are very important, we also believe in addressing all the issues that come into play when we're looking at poverty and homelessness.
So there's Heather McQuillan talking about what the NDP has in mind. You've been the executive director of Chilliwack Community Services and
Yes.
on the front lines of dealing with many of those issues. What did you think about what she had to say? And when you listen to what's happening in the federal election in our riding, what do you think about other things that are said and the plans that are there? Or do you think we're bereft of really ideas in that area?
Well, I think that people tend to overly simplify things, so they refer to the model of housing first, and often it becomes housing only. So in my experience, building a building is the simplest of the equations. So you have to look at what are the issues that actually got people there in the first place. So what we know about the 221 people in Chilliwack that are homeless is that approximately 60 to 70% of them have experienced addiction. And they weren't homeless, but they landed up being homeless as a result of addiction. So we need to look at that. 40% mental health. So some of the public policy that really went wrong many, many years ago was that we closed facilities and put in what we thought was a lovely model called it the community mental health model, but we didn't do it with supports. Mm-hmm. And so it's taken a number of decades to get us to this point. What we need to focus on is definitely affordability. So I saw a statistic today that a few years ago in Vancouver, you could one-bedroom apartment was $832 a month. Now it's around $1,500. So if you've got a minimum wage job, you're working in retail, you simply cannot make it. We've heard the other night from Ruth and Naomi's an increasing number of seniors. Average senior will get say $1,300 a month. Well, if your rent is $1,300, you're out of it. So
sorry to interrupt here, but we have some breaking news. I know the night is still young, and British Columbians like to think that we count in terms of this election outcome, but we're being told something else. Don?
We didn't see this one coming. We thought this was going to take at least a couple of hours on the West Coast. Right now, and again, there are 338 seats. You need 170 for a majority. Right now, the Liberals have 127 leading or elected. The Conservatives 99. The Bloc Québécois 28. NDP 14. The Greens 1. The People's Party are still losing by a slim majority. But CBC is now projecting a Liberal government. Now, we're saying it might be a little early because we're still counting and just updating with Elections Canada. We're still waiting for numbers for Chilliwack Hope, Mission, Mascouy, Fraser Canyon, and Abbotsford. But again, CBC has gone on record now saying that they project a federal Liberal government. And we'll see how the rest of the night plays out if indeed they do make the magic 170 mark. So, Barry, back to you.
Thanks, Don. Maybe not surprising to project a minority government, if that's what they're talking about at this point. I guess what remains to be seen, whether, as you point out, they can get up to that number of 170 seats in order to form a majority. And I think the West will tell that tale. Yeah, Diane, your thoughts on what you've seen from the news?
Well, we still don't know if it's a minority or a majority. You need to get to that 170. I don't think you're going to see a Liberal conservative coalition somehow.
Might be unlikely.
I think one of the surprising things, and we'll see if it happens, is the strength of the Bloc. I mean, the Bloc was decimated in 2011. They landed up with 4 seats, and they're projected to be somewhere in the 39 to 40 range. They actually are projected to have more seats than the NDP at 35. So the Bloc, I think, are the big surprise. The other big surprise is Jagmeet Singh was sort of declared dead on arrival at the beginning of the campaign, and I think he has surpassed all expectations in terms of his performance during the campaign.
I think he showed himself to be quite an excellent campaigner. Whether that translates into seats, we're looking now at perhaps 15 seats so far for the NDP. It looks like what happened in Quebec was that they went back to the Bloc instead of sort of choosing between the Liberal and the NDP. It looks like they've chosen Liberals a lot, but the Bloc has been the big winner in Quebec this evening.
Yeah, and I think there's also concentration of votes. So if you look at, they haven't hit the Manitoba border yet, but go Manitoba all the way to Alberta, you're going to see a sea of blue.
That's correct.
And you're going to change that. You're going to see that number change quite a bit. And then, of course, there are 42 seats in British Columbia, and those and the reason the leaders were here all on Sunday is because we could actually help to determine a Liberal minority or a Liberal majority or Conservative minority or Conservative
With
majority.
those 3- and 4-way races in many ridings across BC, because of course the Greens are an equal component in many ridings, those seats could split any which way. And I agree with you. That is why those federal leaders spent their very last day campaigning here, because the number of those seats could go any which way.
Absolutely.
I nothing to take away from the NDP leader, Mr. Singh, but I did think going into the campaign, the media had set him up for success by declaring him dead on arrival. There's nothing better when you're a challenger to be underestimated. And I've been telling people for months that just watch, the NDP will do much better than projected, because I've seen it time and time again, that when a party enters the election campaign as the underdog, very often they come on strong, and it's the people that go into the campaign ahead that sometimes fall short.
Yeah, I think the other story is in that same analogy that they were talking about. They projected that the Greens were just going to take over the
Correct.
NDP.
Correct.
And I think the performance of the Greens is probably stronger at the front, but I think sort of fizzled. But we haven't seen the last of that. Let's wait till the island, because that's where we're going to see what the Greens actually lined up doing.
I think if the election had been a month ago, the Greens would have won a number of seats on Vancouver Island, maybe as many as 4. But I agree with you. I think the cork was taken out of the champagne bottle a little too soon, and the fizzle's gone out of the bubbles of that champagne.
Do you think there's been any impact of the notion that was being floated that said, when it was such a 2-horse race between the Liberals and the Conservatives, that there was a notion being floated that said, if you don't want the Conservatives elected, you better vote for the Liberals, because anything else is going to just guarantee they're going to get elected. Do you see that in any of the results here? The numbers for the NDP, I feel like, are a little lower than I expected at this point in time. And the Greens, that surprises me. I thought that there was a number of places they may pick up a lot of votes, but it feels to me like the Green vote has gone somewhere and the NDP vote has maybe gone somewhere. Do you feel like that? Did you sense that during
Well, if
the
you
election?
ask yourself from this, after 6 weeks of campaigning from the Greens, what was their main message? What was their core message? I have no idea. And I was following it fairly closely. Anyway, I don't know what their strategy was because it was not apparent to me what their message was.
Well, I would say that's almost clear of all the parties, although there's some taglines I could probably give you for the parties. I feel like this election was driven by who are the leaders, and let's measure them. I mean, we're talking about Jagmeet Singh, we're talking about maybe the Green Party as a party, but it's Justin Trudeau and it's Andrew Scheer. And that's what the election's about. Those people, their leadership, all the ads are there,
And
everything.
their real or perceived shortcomings.
As Diane said, there's no messages about the things that we want to talk about. I talked to a fella and I was asking his impression, and he said, I said, so what do you think? Like, the Conservatives' central message seems to be, we're going to put more money back in your pocket. You're going to come out ahead by this much money. And he said, well, what's that going to do me? It's not going to improve the congestion from here to Vancouver, and I have to drive that every day. It's not going to get more mental health services. It's not going to do this. So there wasn't talk about that, but there was talk about the quality of leadership that Andrew Scheer could provide versus Justin Trudeau versus Jagmeet Singh.
Yeah.
People weren't talking about those issues.
I think one of the issues that was very defining between the Liberals and the Conservatives was the carbon tax.
Yep, I think you're
Because
quite right.
you, on some of these other issues, you might not have seen as much daylight, but on the carbon tax, and if you talk to anybody on the street, boy, you will get a very clear opinion about what people think about the carbon tax, what they feel about climate change. And I think that was kind of the dividing issue big time between the Liberals and Conservatives, in addition to some of the personal stuff, which maybe wasn't that helpful.
Yeah, you're right. That issue, the issue of climate change, carbon tax, did seem to be a dividing line between some of the parties. But so much of it focused on the quality of the leaders. And I found that frustrating because I like to look at the quality of people that are running here and get as much information as I can. And honestly, we've been very well served by members of Parliament since 1962 or 57 when Harold Hicks was elected. We've had some very good quality people, and I wanted to know more about those people, but the news was full of what the leaders were doing.
Absolutely.
So we'll continue to watch as the results come in. Of course, people who are watching us may not see the numbers. Currently, the CBC projection desk is looking at 143 seats for the Liberals, 104 for the Conservatives. Still very early days, in my view, as we're waiting for votes to start rolling in from Western Canada. On Alberta, I'll be surprised if the Liberals can hold on to more than one seat. They might be challenged to do that, given how the debate in that province has been particularly heated with their frustration over not getting a pipeline built.
Absolutely.
Diane, what's your projection? You've spent some time living in Alberta.
Yep.
How do you think it's going to go there?
I think it'll be a sea of blue. I think with the results from the Kenny election, and I think what Kenny has actually done is he's been represented as having done a pretty good job representing Alberta's interests in Ottawa. He's a sort of take no prisoner kind of guy, and I think that has bode well for them. You know, they're really hurting out there. So, and I think they've aptly raised the point. I mean, I was there during the heyday. I mean, people would just buy whatever they wanted because the oil patch was just booming. Well, it's been dead, and they're really hurting, and families are hurting. So, I think that's really central to them. I would be surprised if they might pick up a seat or two, maybe in Edmonton. I really doubt it.
In Redmonton?
In Redmonton, maybe. I really, really doubt it.
And Calgary Centre is going to be a tough win for the Liberals. They won last time, but there's been controversy swirling around the candidate from time to time, and I think it's going to be a very tough tough seat for them to hold.
Yeah.
Closer to home, I foresee difficulty on the north side of the Fraser River here in the riding of Mission, Kent, Fraser Canyon. I remember his name. I should remember.
Jadi
Sidhu.
Yeah.
Won that seat by about 1,000 votes in 2015. And Brad Viss is coming at him a second time. And if I had to wager, I think that riding will go back in the Conservative column.
It could very easily be. It seemed from the press that I've read that Conservatives have done a really good job of campaigning over there. There's a lot of prominent folks from that side of the river that have got on board and are campaigning. Sometimes in the past they stay home, and sometimes they come out. So I think that's going to be a very difficult
And sometimes your election, especially in a close call, is based on your performance in the last 4 years. And I don't think Mr. Sidhu has been viewed as being particularly strong. I think if he had, sort of excelled and exceeded expectations, maybe that would have been more of an issue. But I think when you're an elected person, you better be out there, and you better be proving your worth.
He had some challenges
every
in the
day.
campaign. I noticed the Abbotsford News, the dominant newspaper in that community, I tried 3 or 4 times to interview him, and he agreed to interviews, only not to follow through. For whatever reason, something prevented him from conducting the interviews.
Newspapers love being ignored by politicians.
I think we've all learned how that works.
I have some personal experience at ignoring media. And,
We've been speculating about the future. One of the people I interviewed here on chillTV is Art Green, running for the Green Party. He had a few predictions to share.
Well, thinking of the national picture, of course, every election is really an election in every single constituency across the country. Seeing what's happening on the national stage, what do you think is the best possible outcome for the Greens? Do you think it's possible we could end up with a situation like we have in British Columbia, where there's a minority parliament, no one party has a majority and they have to work with other parties to form a government?
Well, I think there'll definitely be a minority government. I think we'll have elected officials from 7 different parties across Canada. I know in British Columbia we're doing extremely well. We're actually expecting to win 5 out of 6 seats on Vancouver Island. I know we're really strong in Chilliwack Hope and Mission Matsqui Fraser Canyon. We're expecting to win in Prince Edward Island. We're expecting to win a couple of seats in New Brunswick. We'll probably win a seat in Quebec even, one in Ontario. So there is a good chance that the Green Party of Canada will hold the balance of responsibility in the next minority government.
Well, interesting hostage to fortune there. When you say things on tape, they can be brought back. At the moment, it doesn't look like the CBC projection desk is agreeing with what Mr. Green was anticipating coming out of Eastern Canada in terms of seat count for the Green Party.
Yeah, it looks like that vote's gone a different place. And as I said before, I think there was some feeling that if you were Green, you might want to back one of the other parties in order to prevent the Conservatives, where they're an anathema to the Green Party, to prevent them from being elected, and that seems to be playing out.
Yeah, again, I think we're gonna have to wait till we get to the island to see if there's any gains at all. I don't even see that they could do anything in terms of supporting the balance of power. So the projections for the Liberals this morning on a CBC poll was 137. So they've already exceeded that by 10 seats. So I don't think the Greens will play a major role in either a minority or a coalition situation at all.
No, it won't be like British Columbia is today, I don't think, in any way.
It doesn't look that way. The Greens did pick up a second seat just a couple months ago in a by-election on Vancouver Island in Nanaimo. It'll be interesting to see if that MP can hold on to his job and make it more than just a summer job.
Yeah, and one of the other issues was, if you'll remember, Elizabeth May, she made a big point of saying, well, we're the first one to cost our platform, and we've sent it out to the parliamentary budget officer, who quickly panned it and said, well, you haven't included most of your estimates, you're way out. I think there are other concerns that they simply were not able to move out of. They
struggled internally with their candidates going off message on abortion and other topics. I understand that Don Lane has some more news to share with us.
Barry, the CBC is now clarifying their position. They're still saying a Liberal government. Now they're saying Liberal minority government. The updated numbers, the Liberals at 150 seats. This is either elected or leading. The Conservatives at 102. The Bloc at 32. We kind of expected a few more for the Bloc, but again, this is either elected or leading, so their numbers are still being counted. The New Democrats at 32, the Bloc at 32, the NDP at 19, the Greens at 1. We're keeping an eye on Beauce, where Maxime Bernier is losing, not by much, but losing to the Conservatives. He, of course, is the leader of the PPC, the People's Party of Canada. So we don't know if that is going to be a seat that they will win. We are still waiting on British Columbia numbers to come in, and in particular for the Fraser Valley, as well as in particular Chilliwack Hope. Will Mark Strahl return as MP? Also Mission Matsqui Fraser Canyon, as well as Abbotsford. The other area, the seat that we're keeping an eye on, is Vancouver Granville, with former Attorney General Judy Wilson-Raybould, who left the Liberals during the SNC-Lavalin affair to run as an independent. Again, we have not received any numbers yet, but again, the night is still very, very young. We should have something, hopefully, within the next 15 to 20 minutes to start seeing at least a few polls being reported, and the beginning of what might be an interesting shakedown when it comes to British Columbia seats. Again, the CBC is projecting it is a Liberal minority government, but again, we are still counting seats, and we're going to be here for a while. You're watching chillTV's election coverage 2019, and we will be back after this commercial message.
take you where I go. In all of our days still to come, we will ride out to the calling horizon. You can just close your eyes when the light is too bright to behold.
And welcome back to chillTV's coverage of the 2019 federal election, which is turning into plenty of drama. We are agreeing with CBC that it is a federal Liberal minority government. Right now, the Liberals are leading or have elected in 144 seats. The Conservatives with 107. The Bloc Québécois at 34. The New Democrats at 20. The Greens at 1. Right now, Maxime Bernier and the People's Party in his riding of Beauce in Quebec is losing, but not by much, by about 200 seats to the Conservative candidate. We are still waiting for numbers to come in the Fraser Valley for Chilliwack Hope, as well as Abbotsford and Mission Mascouy Fraser Canyon. We'll keep an eye on Vancouver Granville. That's where Judy Wilson-Raybould is running as an independent. Again, it appears to be a minority government situation, but we don't have the final numbers yet. It is still, the night is still very, very young. And now back to our panel and Barry Penner.
Thanks, Don. I'm testing fate here, and I wonder if we're going to be struck by lightning, because we've just been joined by another former mayor, John Less. With the three of us here, I hope that this roof is secure from a lightning strike.
Yeah, I think we'll be okay. We're not going to tell any whoppers to
Clint's been interested in asking John about his views on marketing boards.
Well, I think
particularly since we talked to one of the candidates about that, and he was quite forthright.
Yeah, I think that position of the People's Party of Canada has been one that is staunchly free enterprise and sees marketing boards as government intrusion into our economy. And yet in the Fraser Valley and other places in the world, Quebec notably, marketing boards have really solidified the dairy industry, chickens, eggs, all kinds of things that actually make it possible for us to have sustainable industry there. John, you've been a farmer, you've been on agricultural boards, you've been a member of the legislature. What's your take on that position? And do you think, and I also know you're a staunch free enterpriser, so what's your take on that position that you're taking? And do you think there are legs under that particular horse and that it could go anywhere?
No, I don't think so. You've got to remember that Maxime Bernier and his whole People's Party initiative came out of bitterness that he lost the Conservative leadership race. And he lost it because Andrew Scheer was able to rally the supply-managed industries in the country through selling him a whole bunch of Conservative memberships and whatnot, including in his own riding in Beauce in Quebec. And that was the margin, frankly, that got Andrew Scheer the leadership. Maxime Bernier never got over that. And so, of course, he trotted that out as one of his main issues, but it also handily fit into his overall generally libertarian philosophy that marketing boards, of course, aren't part of his preferences. But, marketing boards, I think, have served Canada relatively well. If you look at other systems around the world, I'm not sure I can readily find one that works better. There's a lot of places, the United States included, where farmers in those commodities, whether it's dairy, eggs, poultry, turkey, they all struggle mightily. We benefit significantly in Canada with supply-managed agriculture as one of the underpinnings of our various economies in different spots across the country.
I think we've got the clip of Barry's interview with Mr. Bogdanovic on marketing boards. If we could run that, we'll give John a chance to have a look at that.
Speaking of more money, one of your major planks in your platform, as I understand it, has to do with marketing boards.
Sure.
And I think your commitment is to phase out marketing boards and the quota system, which help to keep the price of eggs, milk, and some other agricultural commodities higher than they otherwise might be due to market forces. How is that going over in Chilliwack, where we have traditionally been an agricultural community, as well as Agassiz and some other areas?
Well, I do see an awful lot of very large Mark Straw signs on the corners of dairy farmers and their property, which is understandable. I mean, in politics, it's always the you know, politics is the collective act of voting for your own self-interest. And there's no question that dairy farmers have benefited off of a quota system. But the reality was almost all other sectors in Canada are actually being hurt to varying degrees because of our quota system. It also is a question of whether or not this is a fair system for the Canadian consumer. As you acknowledge, it does artificially increase the price paid by milk, dairy, poultry. All of these things, you know, hit the consumer. And actually, it's been calculated about $100 per person per year. That's the indirect subsidy that comes from this. And that hurts the poorest members of our society the most. So I'm always asked, do I want to side with the small number of these dairy producers, which once was 135,000, is now down to 10,000. The amalgamation, across Canada. The amalgamation that's being driven by this is faster than any other sector in agriculture. Do I want to side with 10,000 producers or 36 million Canadians? And to me, even if I'm in a rural, you know, agricultural community, I have a hard time siding with the very small number of producers, however much political power and clout they have, over these 36 million Canadians.
So your thoughts, John, on their position?
Well, you know, it's a, you know, they have a position, and people, you know, like him have, you know, debated that issue with many others for years and years and years in Canada, and frankly around the world. And you know, the argument is often made, well, necessarily the price of these commodities in Canada is higher because of supply management. Even that is arguable. I've seen studies that completely debunk that. The thing is...
not from the Fraser Institute.
The Fraser Institute is one point of view, but there are many others, and I've seen quite a bunch of them in my work over the last 5 or 6 years that would, you know, simply refute the fact that we pay much more at all. Certainly, if you're talking about Canada-U.S. border, in the United States, close to the Canadian border, the prices are lower. The further south you go, the more the prices seem to rise. So it's sometimes difficult to get an accurate read on these prices. What has happened in a place like Australia, where they've gotten rid of supply management, retail prices have actually gone up. Very counterintuitive, but those are the facts.
Interesting that you mentioned the U.S. border. I think you can see how much better Canadian farmers are doing than their American counterparts across the border doing dairy or chicken. You can just see it when you drive through those areas.
It's immediately obvious when you compare the two.
So we're looking at these results tonight, John. The 144, 114 Liberals to Conservatives. Surprises for you, or is this about where you thought it would go? What are you seeing as you watch these results come in?
I thought it was going to be tighter. I thought it was going to be a minority government, but I wasn't sure coming into this evening whether it was going to be, frankly, a Liberal or a Conservative minority. I think the Conservatives will be deeply disappointed. I'm sure they expected much better than this. So they've obviously got work to do. On the other hand, so we have a Liberal minority government. Those that are interested in pipelines, you can kiss those goodbye. That's not going to happen, I don't think, in this scenario. So we're going to have a very divided country, unfortunately. Look at the map up there that shows all the prairies going blue. Probably not a seat to be had for the Liberals in Alberta or Saskatchewan. And with the resurgence of the Bloc in Quebec, I think surprising to many. I don't think we have advanced national unity at all in these last 4 years, and that's, to me, that's obvious tonight.
Yeah, it's going to be a very difficult government, whatever parliament, whatever.
Getting a signal
happens.
that Don Lean has something to tell us.
Perfect.
Barry, now we're starting to get some numbers trickling in literally for Chilliwack Hope, with just 2 of 196 polls reporting. And again, we can't read too much into it. It's just the 2 polls, but Mark Straw leading Kelly Valonis by only 5 votes. Again, the night is young. Mission, Masquee, Fraser Canyon, we still have not received any numbers there or in Abbotsford, but we have been keeping an eye on Beauce, where Maxime Bernier is losing by about 1,500 votes to the Conservative Richard Leroux. And we were always talking off air, tongue-in-cheek, the Rhinoceros Party also has a Maxime Bernier running in that same riding, and he's not doing too badly. 349 votes. Again, it is still very early. Only 2 polls reporting in for Chilliwack Hope. Mark Straw leading Kelly Valonis by only 5 votes. Again, the night is very young. Barry?
Thanks for that update. Of course, the numbers are changing, and we just have to remind ourselves here on our table here that the viewers don't see a screen behind us with the seat count. But what's happening is people are projecting different results, even though the ballots are still being counted, and it's still very, very early. Polls just having closed just over half an hour ago here in our riding and throughout British Columbia. John was making a comment earlier about there go the pipelines. I noticed some commentary the last few days, some pundits trying to discern some kind of softening position on the part of Mr. Singh, the leader of the NDP, that perhaps he would not take an obstructionist position if he were to hold the balance of power in Parliament and not, in his words, be irresponsible with a federal asset, which is now, of course, the pipeline project, as the federal government, well, all of us collectively have purchased it for $4.5 billion. I don't know what those pundits were hearing maybe behind the scenes. I think they were likely being whispered to by some of the handlers for Mr. Singh, but based on his stated comments, I couldn't quite see how the pundits were concluding he would not do everything possible to try and withhold support from Justin Trudeau and supporting his government unless the Trudeau government would stop the construction on that new pipeline.
You think it would, John, go to a confidence vote? Is that what you would think? Here, if there's a Liberal minority, they try to make the pipeline happen?
Well, something as contentious as the pipeline has been, Kinder Morgan pipeline, is bound to, one way or another, find its way into a confidence vote of some kind. In other words, as a NDP, I might say, okay, I'm against the pipeline, and therefore I'm going to vote against the budget.
Sorry to interrupt, gentlemen. Mr. Lane has more to say.
We are just getting word in that Andrew Scheer has won his seat. We're just waiting for Elections Canada to give us an update on those numbers. But as we understand, Andrew Scheer has come back in. The Liberals now leading 143 leading or elected. Conservatives at 119, the Bloc at 36, the New Democrats at 22. If you want to do some quick math, it's 170 seats for a majority. So you take those Liberals 144, add the 22 for the New Democrats, it is still a few seats shy of the 170. But as we understand now, Andrew Scheer has won his seat. Guys?
Yeah, I'm told that we can, in fact, show you, our viewers, some of the latest seat count projections. So why don't we do that now? If the producer in the back room, who's working the magic, is able to put up some numbers, we'll take a look at that screen. Again, these are just projections. These numbers will inevitably change. But what Don was talking about there is if you add up the Liberal number of 145 that's ascribed to them at the moment and the 22 New Democrats, that's still short of a working majority of commanding the House of Commons.
But there's still 15 seats to come.
Still 15 or 14 we haven't heard from at all. And this being likely those are from British Columbia, the NDP will likely get a number of those.
I think, and I'm sure you guys would agree, I don't think that Liberal number is going to go up by much more. No. There's, if we're now at the Saskatchewan border or we're at the Alberta border with results, there's not much coming out of British Columbia and Alberta, certainly not Alberta, some from British Columbia. So what we're going to see is where is that number going to be for the NDP, I think, in British Columbia, and that's going to be the difference here as we move forward.
There's 14 seats to come. Those are obviously from BC. The NDP has been slowly creeping up. They're now at 23. They might even touch 30, close to that. And the Conservatives, I think, would get most of the rest. Although, don't forget, there are some seats that are pretty safe for the Liberals in BC as well. So, you know, there may just be a Liberal NDP numbers this evening that are high enough to break the 170 threshold. Just possibly they could do it together.
And we're interesting, just flashed up on the screen that we're watching. We just saw Judy Wilson-Raybould in third place in that race with the Liberal leading by a fairly significant total, but it was only 1 or 2 polls that had reported at that time.
The other interesting one is in Toronto, where Lisa Raitt, the deputy leader of the Conservatives, is running a somewhat distant second to the Liberal candidate there, which is also a significant one that people have been watching for several weeks.
What do you think of the impact of the current provincial government in Ontario is having on that race? I've heard there's some backlash from Ford's approach to governance there, and people are saying, okay, we voted Conservative once, we're going to back away.
Justin Trudeau certainly
Well, he
made
was-
Mr. Ford front and center in this
He certainly
federal
wanted
campaign.
him a part of the campaign. Do you
And
think
I
that's...
suspect Lisa Raitt may feel that
Yeah,
has something to do with her
it's,
outcome.
it's traditional in Canada to a degree that if you have a certain stripe of provincial government, you go with the other side in the federal election. But I think one of the factors that I've noticed in this particular campaign, Justin Trudeau in particular, has spent an awful lot of time running against various provincial premiers. Whether it was New Brunswick or Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, he's taken them all on, and Ontario, of course, he's taken them on all personally. He'd go to Quebec and say, well, you don't want those evil guys from Ontario and Alberta running the country, so, I'm standing up for Quebec. He had that on the sign in front of his podium. A terrible way to run a campaign, but I guess the Brain Trust figured that's what he had to do to try and, shore up his support.
And it'll be interesting to see that map of Quebec to see how the Liberals did there. We haven't had any of that detail yet coming into us. I think the Bloc resurgence at 36 seats is an indication that many people in Quebec have gone back to more traditional place for them.
More updates apparently coming in from Don Lane.
Barry, we have a few more numbers now for Chilliwack Hope, and Mark Strahl is slowly starting to pull away here with 39% of the vote. Again, 3 out of 196 polls reporting. Strahl with 91 votes, Kelly Valonis with 56, Heather McQuillan, though, with 50, Arthur Green with 25, Rob Agunovic with 8 votes, and nothing yet for Daniel LaMarche of the Christian Heritage Party or Dorothy Jean O'Donnell of the Marxist-Leninists. But right now, and again, very early, 3 polls in, but Mark Strahl is starting to make a little bit of headway as he is trying to become, once again, the MP for Chilliwack Hope. Gentlemen?
John, Diane had said when she was here that she thought there was major issues missing in the discussion and I reinforced that by saying we talked a lot about leaders and leadership. What do you think the major issues that have come out of the campaign are, and how do they reflect what's happening in Chilliwack, and how do you see that changing?
Well, I'm not sure that any major issues really emerged out of that campaign. It just became a slugfest, a mud toss.
A bun toss, somebody
bun toss as
categorized it as at one point in my life, as I recall.
It was a most unedifying, I think, national discussion. Seldom did we hear much in the way of issues, and watching, for example, the one leaders debate we had in English. What was left, I think, in people's mind is, this Jagmeet Singh, he's not such a bad guy. But in terms of the issues, frankly, I think they really do most Canadians a disservice when they have the Bloc Québécois leader in that particular debate. He just takes time from others who are, in fact, going to be the government choices. And so that's a bit of a farce that always frustrates me. But no, did we talk about long-term vision for the country? I don't think so.
I would disagree only somewhat to say that there was commonality, it seemed to me, about who could spend the most borrowed money on whatever pet projects. And it was a race to spend more money that we don't have for whatever noble reasons might be justified, with no explanation about how it would be paid for ultimately.
Well, it seems that whole notion in anywhere in North America, whether it's United States or Canada, the whole notion of paying today for what you need today seems to be out the window. The Americans seem to be racking up debt and deficit at alarming rates, and in Canada we seem to have sort of decided that deficits and debt isn't a real issue.
Well, it's really fallen off the radar as an issue compared to the 1990s. The Reform Party was very effective at making that front and center, and I think they get a lot of credit for the federal Liberal government of the day under Jean Chrétien, taking steps to get Canada back into the balance.
Well, our kids and grandkids are going to hate us big time. You're right. I mean, the United States, they're piling on $1 trillion a year in extra debt. And Canada, in good times, we're adding $20 billion a year in debt. Where's the morality in all of that? There really isn't any. And, we're one deep recession away from financial chaos, frankly.
And and we still need a lot of things
Sure we do.
in our country. And I think about the times that you and I spent in local government talking about infrastructure projects that are the responsibility. We have a national highway going through our community and that should be paid for with federal dollars, and we haven't seen upgrades on that road between Chilliwack and the rest of the world in decades. And where does that money come from if it's being spent other places? Should it be spent here? And that's frustrating for me because we're racking up debt, but in Chilliwack, in the Fraser Valley, in this part of the world, I'm not seeing a lot of investment in federal infrastructure or infrastructure.
No, it's been precious little that has been spent in this part of the world. And, you know, I saw a headline just a few weeks ago. There's apparently $2.5 billion in the federal infrastructure program that's unaccounted for. You know, where is that money? Where did it go?
Well,
don't know.
It was supposed to have been spent, but never got spent. It's not that they've lost $2.5 billion. It's just they were supposed to allocate $12 billion, and all they can find is that they allocated 10, and now they're searching through who didn't.
Something tells me they'll find a way to spend it.
Oh, rest assured, it's being spent.
We
But I'd like us
to
apply for some.
Go to Don Lane with a further update.
Thank you, Barry. Justin Trudeau has won his seat as expected. The numbers, though, are now interesting when you're trying to look at what will happen with a minority government, either elected or leading. The Liberals have 150, the NDP with 24. The magic number is 170 for a majority. Put those two together, and that's 173, 174 seats. Right now, the Conservatives with 117 and the Bloc at 35. With polls coming in now, 5 of 196 in Chilliwack Hope. Mark Strahl is now pulling away. He has about 43% to 44% of the popular vote, leading with 289 votes, leading the Liberal Kelly Valonis who has 163. Heather McQuillan, the NDP candidate, with 129. The Green Party was 64. The People's Party, Mark Bogdanovich, with 16 votes. We were also keeping an eye on Vancouver Granville, and Jody Wilson-Raybould is not having a good night at all. The Liberal Talib Noor Mohammed has 37, almost 38% of the vote. The Conservative is in second place, and Jody is now in third place. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. We are still waiting for Elections Canada to give us numbers from Matsquamish, Fraser Canyon, as well as Abbotsford. But the big story for the Fraser Valley right now, Mark Strahl has a rather comfortable lead, and in Vancouver Granville, it is turning into a very long night for Jody Wilson-Raybould. Again, if you do some very quick math, with a minority government, the Liberals with 152 seats, either elected or leading, the New Democrats with 24, you do the math, we have a minority government. Back to you guys. Gentlemen?
Thanks, Don. So this might not be the first time that a Trudeau government in their second term has had to turn to the NDP to win some votes in the House of Commons. I'm thinking of Pierre Trudeau after the euphoria of Trudeau mania in '68, had a closer call than this, I think, in terms of his political fortunes in 1972, and was able to skate by for a couple of more years in the House of Commons with the support of the NDP.
Here's a little trivia question to see if you know. In 1972, in this riding, of course, Jerry Pringle was running to get his seat back. Right. He was challenged by Alex Patterson, who was now a conservative, progressive conservative. Right. The NDP candidate was Walt Heinrich, who ran, who was the social credit candidate in that day. It's a very famous social credit name that was parachuted into the riding to run for the Socreds.
Oh. I should know, but
it was Cyril Shelford.
Oh, yes.
Came in and ran in this riding in 1972.
Came down from Skeena.
That's correct, and he got 4,400 votes in that election. I thought, you know, Chilliwack, maybe it's predictable where we're going to go, but there's some very interesting stories in our.
No, Barry's quite right. That 72 election was extremely close. That was a difference of 2 seats between the Liberals and the Conservatives. And but Pierre Trudeau kept it going with the support of the NDP. And looks like now Justin Trudeau is going to get the similar opportunity to govern with the NDP holding the balance of power.
Now, of course, it's not completely early, but the results are still coming in. But even before the polls closed a few days ago, there was a story in the Globe and Mail about certain senior operatives in the Conservative Party thinking about looking for a different leader after today. Did any of you gentlemen follow that story about trying to recruit back Peter MacKay into politics. He did not run in the 2015 campaign. He was a high-profile cabinet minister, former Minister of Justice, Minister of Defense in the previous Conservative government. What do you think's happening with those phone calls tonight?
Well, I think it's a bit early for that, but, you know, no kidding, they're going to be shattered. You know, they expected a far better result than this. And so those questions will be asked. Should there be some kind of a leadership review process, then I'm thinking more along the lines of someone like Aaron O'Toole. I doubt that Peter MacKay would step back into it. Aaron O'Toole being fairly well liked, apparently, and from Ontario, I think may be the more attractive candidate for them. So, but it's pretty early, you know, for that kind of speculation. But obviously those questions get asked when you've just come through a campaign with this kind of disappointment.
I think what was challenging for the Conservatives was to have that question asked 4 or 5 days before voting day. Not helpful to be on the front page of a national newspaper.
But, yeah, to the extent that there was any oomph at all in the Conservative campaign, they lost that in the last 3, 4, 5 days of campaign. They finished miserably. And to his credit, Justin Trudeau in the last couple of days seemed to have a lot of enthusiasm and you know, inspiration going on that Scheer just didn't, for whatever reason, from my perspective anyway.
My understanding is that right now across the country, on average, the federal Liberals are polling at about 35% support, significantly higher than what polls had predicted. Now those numbers will change as more votes are tallied here in BC. But it looks like maybe the polls underestimated the Liberal support, or maybe they had a late surge as the Conservatives struggled with Andrew Scheer having trouble explaining his dual citizenship, not being an insurance broker, and a few other questions.
Well, I think there was everybody was facing those kinds of questions. I mean,
Right.
You've got blackface and whatever else on the other
But
side.
it seemed like
so-
that came early in the campaign.
Yeah.
And these other issues for
They
the
were
Conservatives came later
later.
in the campaign.
Yeah.
I think
Interrupting the momentum.
we should ask the same question. I haven't heard it raised, but same question about the NDP and their leadership. They're going from 44 seats in the last parliament, and if they pick up the same seats they won in British Columbia, that's 8 or 9 seats, they're going to be significantly reduced. And before the election, people were saying Jagmeet Singh is not the guy, and he's been a disappointment. During the election, he raised his profile, but he's not brought the party back to, I mean, 75% of what they had, it looks like. Is that going to be an issue for the NDP?
Well, the NDP is back to where they were in the 1980s and 1990s. You know, 25, 26, 27 seats maybe tonight when it's all said and done. That's where they historically were prior to the big Jack Layton breakthrough. So I don't know that they're going to be able to hang it so much on
I think there is a
Jagmeet
major
Singh.
difference for Mr. Singh in that, first of all, the expectations were very low. Everybody expected him to fall flat, except for me. He had been written off, his obituary politically had been written months ago, prematurely. So he's overcome those expectations, and people in the party some of them will be surprised and pleased that he did better than the wipeout that had been forecast. And the other thing is, if this continues to be a minority government situation, he's going to be pivotal.
Oh, yes.
He's going to be
have a
front
big
and
role
center,
to play,
and it might be difficult for his party to take him out, to challenge him while he's playing such a pivotal role, negotiating on a vote-by-vote basis, if that's what it comes down to, whether or not to support the Liberal government.
Oh, yeah, he'll single-handedly be able to stop that pipeline.
He may insist on it, although again, in recent days there's some rumors that maybe he'll let this one pass, but that could cause problems in his party. I'm told that we need to hear from our sponsors, the people
Okay.
that make this all possible.
Awesome.
I'm telling you right now, I don't want to waste your time. This is going to be the pilot. Many of things will come on the show that are great, huge, okay? You're wondering, how am I going to get people to interview? Trust me, who would not want to be on this show? I have a lot of friends in town.
Yeah, name a couple.
Relevant. I have friends.
Relevant.
A lot of them, right? A lot of them I got from Hofstede's Country Barn too. So
Are you doing product placement right now?
that's
Hi, baby. I love that.
That's how you gotta do
love
it.
product placement, but the only thing is, you're barking up the wrong tree with Hofstede's. Richard, he's a little, right? Right? You know that.
Yeah, but
He's not going to buy this.
welcome to the show. I am
What the hell are
taping
you? This is the show?
This is the show. I'm telling you that right now.
And welcome back to chillTV's extensive coverage of election 2019 for the Fraser Valley and nationally. I'm Don Lane in the chillTV News Anchor Desk. It is turning into an interesting evening as we are going to have a Liberal minority government. The Liberals leading or elected in 155 seats. 33.8% of the popular vote. The Conservatives are at 119, the Bloc with 35 votes, the NDP with 24. A lot of people thought they might get into Jack Layton territory. That's not going to happen, although we're still counting BC votes. And a total of 336 so far reporting. Again, you need 170 for a majority. So if you take 154 of the Liberals and you add the 25 with the New Democrats, there is your government right now as of just after 8 o'clock, 8:02 Pacific time. Chilliwack Hope, Mark Strahl now with 43% of the vote, 10 of 196 polls in, and leading Kelly Valonis by about 300 votes, and leading Heather McQuillan by about 340 votes. Rob Bogdanovic with only 40 votes, Daniel Lamarche, Christian Heritage Party with 4 votes, Dorothy Jean O'Donnell of the Marxist-Leninist with 4 votes as well. Still waiting. Oh, no, we're starting to get Abbotsford numbers as well. For Mission Matsqui, as we're just doing an update here, Brad Viss of the Conservatives with a rather healthy lead over Jadi Sadhu. This is now 4 out of 179 polls reporting. Viss with 207 votes, Sadhu with 114. So right now Viss with 41, almost 42% of the vote. With Abbotsford, it's still early, but Ed Fast, the Conservative MP, leading with Seamus Heffernan, the Liberal, just behind. So Fast with 57, the Liberal with 44 votes. Now, going to the other riding we're keeping an eye on. By the way, Maxime Bernier has lost Beauce. He has lost that seat. The Conservatives have won that. In Vancouver, Granville, Talib Noor Mohammed, the Liberal, has a 50-point lead, or 50 vote lead rather, over the Conservative Zach Siegel, and about a 65 vote lead over the independent Jody Wilson-Raybould, who of course left the Liberals for the SNC Lavalin affair. So that's where we stand right now. Again, leading or elected, the Liberals 155, the Conservatives 119, the Bloc with 35 seats, the NDP with 24, and 3 others. And again, the night is still young. You're watching chillTV's election coverage, and now back to our desk.
Hey, thanks, Don. Very interesting times. But we have a new guest, and Clint, why don't you introduce her?
We sure do. This is Willow Richelt, and Willow is new to politics in Chilliwack. She was recently elected as a school trustee. One of those people I follow on social media because she's always got really interesting things to say. Very plugged in and connected, I would say, with the goings-on in the community, and often has a progressive view of the way, and we use progressive now as a term without too much boundaries on it.
Without the word conservative behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not progressive conservative anymore. It's just progressive.
It's a little bit of a loosey-goosey
Yeah.
term.
So I thought it would be pretty good to throw that out. And really wanted to have your perspective on, I think, a number of things tonight. First of all, your take on what's happening nationally, and how you feel that's going to play out in our community.
Well, I'm quite happy with the results. I mean, I didn't want a conservative government, so I'm thrilled that we don't have one. And I'm very, very happy that
You can speak your mind while you're here. I just want you to know that.
I'm very happy that the PPC got no seats at all, and not even Maxime Bernier's seat. So that's a real victory as well. As Canadians said loud and clear that we're not going to stand for racism in our country, and I think that's excellent. I personally really like minority governments. I think that I wanted electoral reform. I was very strong in that. Every time we've had a referendum, I want electoral reform. I want our governments to reflect the will of the people. And this will be closer to that if we do end up with a bit of a coalition.
Just on that note, I would say it proves, in fact, that our parliamentary system works. I'm on the other side of the fence on the issue of proportional representation, because I've studied political science, and none of the systems make much sense to me. So, you know where I've lined up on that, along with the rest of the majority of British Columbians. I support a parliamentary system, not without changes. I think there's always room and need to make it better, and we need to focus on that. But here we have an election result that will be one of the more interesting parliaments in some time. With the Greens, it looks like maybe heading towards having 3 seats. So we'll have more diversity, there's a well-used term, in this parliament than maybe we've seen for some time, with the Bloc resurgence. The NDP, although down from their previous seat totals, they seem to be, as John Les pointed earlier, going back to their historical number of seats they had in the 80s, but having enough to play a pivotal role in this upcoming parliament.
Yes, I think it'll be, if these are the results, basically, I think we'll have a good parliament in the sense that it's going to have to reflect the realities of what the country has said. This is where we're at. So I think that's good. Locally, Willow, you're plugged in, you follow politics. What do you think are the issues that a new government in Ottawa ought to be able to address in this community, or where do you think we're losing out from our federal government in this community where they could do a better job?
Well, I mean, I think that a lot of people in our town don't love the fact that a pipeline is going to go across our aquifer, right? Or that it already is there, and that we're going to put another one across it. So whether you think there should be a pipeline or not is a different issue, but I think that the route should definitely be changed. It would be nice if that could happen. I think that our community, we have higher rates of child poverty, we have higher rates of teen pregnancy, we have higher rates of like our health is slightly lower than average, so things like pharmacare, for example, would be very helpful. So I'm hoping that's one of the things that the NDP could help spur along in a liberal government. Yes.
So minority governments are really interesting, and they can produce a broader range of outcomes. Kelly Velinus was interviewed by Barry, and she talked a little bit about minority governments and what that means. We'll go to that interview now, and then I'll get you to offer some comments on that. We have the interview with Kelly Velinus.
If the results on Monday night leave us with a parliament that the British would say is a hung parliament, that is no federal party having a majority of seats, what do you think would be wrong with the idea of forming a coalition government?
So right now we're just really concentrating on having a progressive majority government. It's not whether we think it's wrong to form a coalition, but I don't believe that Canada's had a coalition government since 1917, if I'm correct. So history has shown that it's not something that Canadians have either voted for or wanted. So I guess October 21st will lead us to what the new history will be and what path we will follow then. But right now, we want to just make sure that we have a strong majority inclusive government and not a conservative government full of cuts.
Getting to the local level here, how would you approach the job of representing our area differently than what we've seen in the last 8 years from the incumbent MP for Chilliwack Hope, Mark Straw?
Well, I guess what I haven't seen is an MP that works for the people of this riding, an MP that represents the citizens in Chilliwack and Hope. somebody who is engaged with, who knows what the concerns are, and is the voice to Ottawa for the riding, isn't Ottawa's voice to hear. I've heard, and I've heard on this interview as well with Mark Strahl, where he says he holds Justin Trudeau accountable. Well, if you're holding somebody accountable for 1 million new jobs, the lowest unemployment rate, a national housing strategy, 300,000 children lifted out of poverty with our child tax benefit, which the Conservative government opposed, then I'm not sure that's holding someone to accountability. I think it's time in Chilliwack and Hope that we hold our MP to accountability. And that means making sure that they're doing everything they can to represent the people in this riding. And that's what I can bring. I think my skill set of working in nonprofit and working with different levels of community partners and government is exactly what Chilliwack needs to move forward.
Well, we're back. From that was an interesting comment. Now, it looks like Mr. Strahl will be our MP for a 3rd term here, probably not playing as the kind of role he was hoping he would be playing after tonight, in terms of being on the government side of the bench. Interesting, just looking at the national numbers now in terms of popular support. We talked briefly on the idea of proportional representation as a system. Interesting, it looks like the Conservatives will actually, they're on track right now to have a larger share of the popular vote, but significantly fewer seats. And this is something that does periodically happen in our parliamentary system. In fact, my first time getting elected, my party had 3% more of the popular vote and ended up in an opposition and with a majority NDP government. So these are the things that can happen in a parliamentary system, which is really designed to provide stability. The overarching objective of the parliamentary system is to have a government that's functioning and to know who to hold accountable. Looking at the results closer to home, in the Fraser Valley, it looks like the early results north of the Fraser, Jedi Sadu, looks like he may not be going back to Ottawa, but that Ed Fast in Abbotsford will again. Clint, do you remember when Ed was first elected?
Yeah, I was about 6 years old, I think, at the time.
He's been there?
He's been in a long, long time. And you know, I knew Ed before he was in government, because in federal government, he was a councillor with the city of Abbotsford for many years. And he's adored in Abbotsford. He's always been seen as somebody who's worked for the community. I think he could run for the Rhinoceros Party and get elected because he's got that kind of reputation of getting things done. I feel like Ed has always been seen as Kelly described, as a politician that represented his constituents in Ottawa as opposed to Ottawa to his constituents. And I think it would be a tough job if you got tagged to run against him in that riding. Jadi Sadu, though, is different. He was a star within the Liberal Party when he was first put forward, and now it seems like he's going to go down to defeat to Brad V in Mission, and that's a bit of a surprise to me. But not completely unexpected. What I wanted to ask Willow is, in 2015, the NDP had nearly 20% of the votes in 44 seats. That seems to be dropping down to around 15% of the vote. You're plugged into some of the goals and aspirations of that party. What do you think they need to do differently to begin to have their message resonate more?
Well, I think a couple things happened to the NDP. So in the last election, they did a strategic mistake, and they decided that what Canadians wanted was to go to the middle, and Canadians were ready to go to the left. So the Liberals went left and left the NDP floundering, and it was just a total disaster strategically. So they lost some of the seats. They were supposed to win the last election, and then everything crumbled. Exactly. I mean, it was terrible. So that didn't work out. And then because Thomas Mulcair left, and then Jagmeet Singh became the leader but didn't have a seat, it's hard to have a profile when you don't have a seat. And then he strategically did that at first, and then he said what riding he was going to run in, and the Liberals stopped him from running for months and months and months and months. Yeah. And I think that's partly because they knew people would like him if they saw him. So he has only been in Parliament for a little while, and so I think therefore people thought, it's his fault that the party's falling apart. I would put the blame more on the last leader, but anyways, so I think he's done really, really well in this campaign. He's the most popular leader in the polls right now when you just look at popularity of leaders, not the party. And I think it'll be interesting to see what he does over the next 4 years and what the next election looks
What do you think they have to do now? I mean, I think this next period is going to be interesting
Because
because
of course it might not be 4 years.
Yeah, well, yeah,
You know,
it depends on,
minority
yeah,
government,
it could
we
be
could
one,
have-
could be 6 months.
My guess it'll be longer. We've seen that here in British Columbia, that
Well, what
minority
about
governments can last longer,
Joe
but
Clark's was like
9 months.
yeah, not very long.
very long. There was a cup of coffee, his government. But we talked about the pipeline earlier, and you brought it up as well. And, you know, Justin Trudeau decided the way forward with the pipeline was to buy it. And so the government had more control. Conservative position has been, let's get the darn thing built. Justin Trudeau and the Liberals have said, we'd really like to do that. They're a little more passive about how that's going to happen with lots of consultation on this. The NDP's position has so far been, no, they have not been supportive of that. Now they're in the position of having a little bit of leverage.
Yeah.
Where do you think they're going to go with this? Because there is potential that the Conservatives and the Liberals would vote for a bill that actually finished the pipeline.
Well,
Where
and
do
you
think they're
know,
gonna
that
be with
happened
that?
before. I mean, when the Conservatives had a minority, it was actually the Liberals who propped them up, right? So, I mean, technically the Liberals could join with the Conservatives on some things that they want to pass through. This is not guaranteed that the Liberals and NDP are going to work together the whole way through, right?
We saw that provincially here, where most of the time the Greens have been voting to prop up the NDP government provincially. But when it came to LNG development and tax changes to facilitate a major LNG project, one of the biggest projects we've ever seen in North America, the Greens voted against it. BC Liberals voted to make it happen with the NDP government. Otherwise, we would not have LNG taking place in British Columbia. But the Liberals supported the NDP to make that happen, because the Greens said, we just won't do that.
I know that Jagmeet Singh did put out a list of his things that would be conditions for forming a coalition. I don't have them in front of me. I don't remember if the pipeline was on there. I don't think it was, though. So that might be one of the things they concede.
That's being interpreted by some of the
things.
pundits nationally, and I think what's happening behind the scenes, that this does happen, where the handlers talk, perhaps with authority of the leader, but unofficially and off the record, to senior media covering the campaigns. And they seem to be sending the signal that Jagmeet Mr. Singh will not hold out the pipeline as a condition of supporting the government. So in other words, may allow that project to be completed.
It's
speculation. But
it's interesting because I think that the Liberals and the NDP actually make quite a natural pairing to govern together.
I think the Conservatives would agree with you.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, people often joke and say NDP are just Liberals in a hurry, right? So I mean, they do have similar policies, but the NDP always want to go a bit farther. So I think they're not diametrically opposed. Obviously, the NDPs is more socialist than the Liberals, but it's not
social democratic.
Social democratic, of course we do. Yes.
Back in terms of impacting British Columbia, one of the things to watch now, given what we think is going to be an outcome of a Liberal minority government, is a commitment made just about 2 weeks ago in the campaign. It caught some observers off guard, which was a promise now by Justin Trudeau that he will phase out all open pen aquaculture on the coast of British Columbia. And I've been hearing from First Nations communities up and down the coast, people working for them, worried about the 4,000 to 6,000 jobs and whether they can actually be transitioned to a closed pen system, whether that will be economically viable. Well, that was a promise people didn't see coming, but there were obviously discussions happening behind the scenes.
I know locally that will be very popular with some of the people I know. There's a big wild salmon coalition that they're always fighting against fish farms.
Right.
So.
It's going to play multiple ways. It'll be interesting to see how that gets executed. I think the commitment is to phase it out in 5 years.
Okay.
Well, I think what we'll see, if there is a coalition government, what you'll see is a lot of those things coming on the table from the NDP to say, okay, do you want this? Then we'll give you this and this, that kind of horse trading. The one I'm most interested in is minimum wage.
Yes.
And I wonder if we're going to get to a point in the country, and this is me just speaking, where we actually have a minimum wage that people can live on. I think that we're past the point now in terms of poverty in our country, where, especially in Vancouver or Toronto or some of those big centers where you're making minimum wage, that wouldn't even cover your rent. And so it's forcing different kinds of living arrangements. I think it's forcing a lot of things to happen that shouldn't happen. I think
the federal government, though, you have to remember, has a limited role to play in our labor force. Going by memory, which is probably wrong, but I think less than 10% of our workforce in Canada is under federally regulated industries.
Yes.
And many of those industries are heavily unionized.
Better than minimum wage.
Transportation, airlines, pipelines, anything that crosses provincial borders, and telecoms, telecommunications sector. Like
The federal government can also sort of set a tone, though, like
they can.
the
They can
moral
show
authority
leadership
they
in that.
show.
And
like,
they're contracting.
Yeah.
So that where that can happen is with infrastructure projects, there can be a requirement to pay a certain minimum salary or income wage for federally funded infrastructure projects. Of course, would increase the cost of those projects, but that could be something we could see coming.
Now I'm starting to sound like a liberal in a hurry, but there's always
Go over
been,
to the orange side.
there's
It
always
is almost
been,
Halloween.
Yeah, it is almost. There's been talk, and I followed it actually in the United States because one of the presidential candidates is talking about this. The notion of something called a sort of a minimum income,
right?
Yeah.
A guaranteed minimum
Guaranteed
income
income.
for people, rather than social assistance programs and that. And I hope we get to a point where we can have a discussion about poverty in our country, because I think it's when you even look in Chilliwack and you see the desperate straits of people, and this is pretty livable community from an expense perspective, and yet so many people living at the edges of poverty.
Interesting, because the guaranteed annual income isn't just a left-wing thing anymore. There are actually people on both sides
Economists,
talking about
yeah.
it because we are actually shockingly at a point where we're going to be losing tons of jobs, and not just like it used to be. Automation got rid of like menial jobs, right? But we're starting to lose like accountants because everyone can do their taxes online, and there's all these jobs that used to
Accountants
be.
would disagree with that.
No, but like not the fancy accounting stuff, but like lots of people do their own taxes. And then if driverless technology actually happens and actually takes over, it's like drivers, like taxi drivers, bus drivers, long haul trucks.
No time soon is my prediction.
I know, but
Former chair of
if it does happen, it's going to be like a
Don Lane is waiting patiently to bring us some news about what's happening out there.
Very to no one's surprise, Elizabeth May has won her seat, and right now the Greens have 4 seats, either leading or elected. Again, on the national scale, the Liberals were leading or elected in 156, or 33.5% of the vote. The Conservatives with 34.1% of the vote, and leading or elected in 122 seats. The Bloc with 32 seats, the NDP with 25, and again, the Greens with 4. When it comes to Chilliwack Hope, Mark Strahl is now leading 2-1 over Kelly Valonis, as well as Heather McQuillan, with about 43%, almost 44% of the vote for Chilliwack Hope. Brad V, very comfortable ahead in Mission Matsqui, Fraser Canyon, with 1,154 votes. Jadi Sadhu, only 654 votes. That's 18 out of 179 polls reporting. Almost, shall we say, a cakewalk, almost, for Abbotsford and Ed Fast. 1,189 votes, 45.6%. Of the vote coming in. The nearest one to him is the Liberal Seamus Heffernan at 625 votes. This is 15 out of 167, but it doesn't look like Ed Fast is going to have anything to worry about this evening. Again, Elizabeth May has won her seat. Also, we're keeping an eye on Vancouver Granville, and things are now starting to tighten up a little bit. Zach Siegel, the Conservative, now leading with 1,146 votes. And right behind is Talib Noor Mohammed, the Liberal, with 1,095. Only 40 votes behind is Jody Wilson-Raybould. So we want to break that down. Zach Siegel with 27, just over 27% of the vote. Talib Noor Mohammed with 26%, and Jody Wilson-Raybould 25%. That is 32 of 205 polls that have reported. So this could go down to the wire. Back to you guys.
Thanks, Don. And speaking of Jody Wilson-Raybould, don't forget there is an active RCMP investigation which did not conclude before the election. It may have some things to say yet about the conduct of the Prime Minister's office in what some say was an interference in an active criminal prosecution involving corruption and dollars being paid to certain decision makers. So stay tuned on that front.
It'll be very interesting as that moves forward. It looks like we've got all the polls in the country reporting in
to
now,
some extent. Yeah.
To some extent. So those numbers will shift a little bit, perhaps not much. It looks like the Liberals will have a chance to form government and likely get support from the NDP and others to do that. I wanted to ask Willow about the local NDP party. May have some interest or knowledge. It seemed that this is the first time that I can remember that there wasn't a standard bearer that had come out of the community to represent the local NDP. And I'm wondering if you have some intelligence around what's happening there, or why you may think that happened.
Basically, what my understanding is that there was someone who had fully said they intended to run like back in January, and it was great. It was like, hey, we're gonna have a local person. It's awesome. And then that person had a illness in the family, and they had, so then it was like the last minute. It was like a month before the election was going to start, and there was a bit of a scramble, and there was a lot of people who were asked who were not able to at the time. So no one wanted to do it with that. I mean, it's
with that kind of
it's
notice,
a hard riding to win. Obviously, it's a long shot anyway. So to put a whole bunch of effort in, but like have no time to prepare or whatever, a lot of people weren't into doing it. So no major party's ever going to let a seat be like just not have a candidate in it, right? So they always put someone in, and Heather McQuillan stepped up, and she's a very nice person. I've met her, and I really like her actually, but it is a little odd having someone who's not from the city running.
I'm glad you made that clear to me, especially. I was disappointed to hearing what you've said. I'm sorry for the person that thought this was going to be what they did and they had to pull out. But it's a better story than we couldn't find anybody. And I think that's I'm glad we've got that story.
Had they been looking back in January properly, they would have found someone back then. But leaving it to the last minute, people are like, I don't have time to do this right now.
And Barry and I can both attest it doesn't matter what level you're dealing with in terms of getting elected. And John, and I'm sure Diane would say the same thing, that this is a commitment you make a year ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
And you, and not to mention putting together all of your affairs to be able to do that, and then
try and find the time, reorganize your work,
so
and try to find volunteers.
And the constituency association is small in Chilliwack, so it was just lots and lots of people were asked.
Hard job. We saw some numbers. I understand the greater media is reporting on one of my former colleagues from the legislature, Gordon Hogue, who I served with for many years in the legislature. He won a kind of a surprise upset by-election just 2 years ago. He took a seat that had been held by Diane Watts, but she was a Conservative MP, former mayor of Surrey. She became a Conservative MP, and then she quit after the last
Gordon,
election.
of course, was a former mayor of White Rock. So
Gordy Hogue, part of that riding included White Rock, and he was a popular mayor. He won in the by-election. He's seeking re-election as an MP, again, after many years of being in the legislature. It looks like he will not be going back to Ottawa. Based on early results, it looks like that riding may go back to the Conservative column tonight. Not a great surprise, perhaps, but it was quite an impressive by-election upset 2 years ago when he took that one for the Liberals.
yeah, I've seen the map, and it looks like there may be a couple of seats, Liberal seats in British Columbia. They seem to be closed out for now, and it'll be split between the NDP and the Conservatives. So,
out of curiosity, I don't know what the Conservative seat total was before the election. Did they go down or did they go up?
They were at around 99 seats, as I recall.
So they have gone up.
This is the 2015, so they've gone up by a fair number. The NDP have gone down by about 10 seats.
The Conservatives are up about 23 seats, but that'll still be a very disappointing result for Mr. Scheer and other people in his party who were hoping that they would form the government.
Yes.
So winning 23 extra seats is a small consolation to losing government.
And I think when you look at the popular vote, it's very, very close. It's a statistical tie, if you will, and yet that's translated in the way our ridings are drawn into significantly more seats for the Liberals.
And based on the way the different ridings had different parties were stronger in different parts of the country.
But it's interesting because at the beginning of the election period, this is what all the aggregate pollsters were saying, was that even though it was tied statistically, the Liberals had a seat advantage. And then all of a sudden in the last couple of weeks, it was starting to say, well, actually it might be a Liberal plurality or a Conservative plurality. But now we've actually, it looks like the original polls were probably the most accurate.
So many times I've noticed in election polls that what you see at the beginning of the campaign is often what you see at the end of the campaign.
It is that time again for us to go to a commercial.
Okay.
Because this is a free enterprise undertaking after all.
Hey, and let's let Diane come back.
Let's have Diane come back and replace me. I have other duties that I need to attend to. So unfortunately, this is it for me for this evening. It's been a pleasure for me to be here with you guys and with all of you out there on internet land. Thank you for your interest in the electoral process, and stay tuned for more.
Thanks, Barry.
Hello, welcome to Small Talk.
It's you I want to know, and the journey that brought you to this point today. Come ride with me on my Palomino, my amigo. I'll take you where I go. In all of our days still to come, we will ride out to the calling horizon. You can just close your eyes when the light is too bright to behold.
Welcome back. I'm Don Lane, chillTV News at the anchor desk for the election coverage of 2019. It is a Liberal minority government, and the latest numbers that we have are the Liberals leading or elected in 158 seats, the Conservatives with 121, the Bloc at 32, the NDP with 24, and the Greens with 3. That includes Elizabeth May. She has won her seat. The popular vote is interesting, and something that the panel has already discussed. As we understand now from Elections Canada, the Conservatives have picked up 3,213,000 votes. The Liberals, 3,141,000 votes. The NDP, 1,420,000 votes. That is still in flux. All the seats now, the 338, are reporting of some form or another. And looking at what we have in the Fraser Valley, right now, Mark Strahl very comfortable with 44% of the vote, with 2,700, almost 2,800 votes. And following up with Kelly Valonis, the Liberal, in second place with 1,350 votes, and then Heather McQuillan of the NDP with 1,252. Mission Matsqui, things are tightening up, but not by much. Brad V, the Conservative, still leading with almost 41% of the votes, 1,700 votes. Just over 1,000, approaching 1,100 is Jaddy Sidhu, and that is 27 out of 179 polls reporting. In Abbotsford, no contest right now. Ed Fast way out in the lead with almost 49% of the vote, 3,121 votes. Second and third place, though, was interesting. The Liberals, Seamus Heffernan with 1,380 votes, and Madeleine Sauvé of the NDP with 1,247. One other riding that we failed to mention earlier this evening was Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou, and Terry Lake is not having a good night. Kathy McLeod of the Conservatives with 4,800 votes, 42.7% of the vote. Terry Lake with only 28, almost 29% of the vote, 3,256. That is 50 polls reporting of 283. So another one of those interesting ridings that may be changing. We'll keep you up to date as the night goes on. Again, the Liberals with 157 seats leading or elected, with the New Democrats 25. Do the math, that's over the magic 170 mark. We have a Liberal minority government. Back to our panel.
Thanks very much, Dawn. And I'm joined back again with Diane, and she's going to offer her perspective as we've said goodnight to Barry, and that's great. And Willow is still here with us. I'd like to talk a little bit about Chilliwack and what this means. I'll start by saying, you know, Chilliwack's changing, I think, a lot. There were days when the Conservative candidate could expect to get 60% of the vote, and everybody else would fight for the dregs underneath that. Nowadays, we're seeing those numbers in the last election. I think the first election that Mark was elected was 57% of the vote. The next election was 42% of the vote. I think we're seeing it's going to land somewhere around there. Yeah. The demographics of the community are changing. Diane, do you see that in the work that you're doing, that the demographics are changing here?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the other thing that's happening is we're starting to get some sort of big city problems. You know, we're no longer a small sort of agricultural community. We're struggling with issues of homelessness and addiction and some of those kind of issues. And I think anybody who's elected, wouldn't matter what stripe they were, but people must demonstrate that there are improvements. I attended the City Hall's portal review the other night. And it was extremely difficult, actually. I think City Hall made the right decision, but you could tell the feelings in the room in terms of wanting to do something about homelessness, at the same time wanting to have a healthy neighborhood. So I think whoever it is going to have to represent something quite a bit more diverse than what we've seen here in Chilliwack in the last 50 years.
And Willow, you've been on school board now for a period of time, and certainly changes within the community get reflected at the school board very quickly. What are you seeing that's changing?
I think that we're actually experiencing a real demographic shift away from conservatism in our town. I think it's going to take a while to hit federally, because federally we have so many parties, right? So I think we had definitely a real progressive showing on the school board. To a lesser extent in the council race. I think we'd be more likely to see a shift in provincial politics before federal, because there's really only two parties, right? So, like you said, the Conservatives used to get more than 50% of the vote every time. Like, they're just always federally, and they don't anymore. But we have Greens, the NDP, and Liberals running against them. So it's going to take probably a lot of years before that changes, I think. But
in terms of demographics, sitting in the school board chair and interacting with families and schools, and seeing in schools and seeing who the people are that are now living in our community, what kind of changes are you seeing at that level?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, like Diane said, we do have big city problems. Like in our downtown core, we have inner city schools that would be the same as an inner city school in a city. They have the exact same problems at a couple of our schools. But then we've also got, you know, young urban people living in Promontory and in some areas that actually work in Vancouver, right? So we have, it's interesting the way it's not all people from Chilliwack who've grown up in Chilliwack living in Chilliwack anymore and raising their kids here. It's quite...
I think that there's a sense that we think we're this community, but in reality, we're this community, and it's taking time for people to really understand that. We have people that say, "Well, what do you mean we've got homeless?" You know, and we do. We have a significant issue with people who have nowhere to live. We have a significant issue with people who are struggling with a mental illness. We have a significant issue with people who are addicted, and there's connections between all of those points. How do you see the federal government? And if you had a message for Mark Strahl, who's going to be our representative, what's the message that Mark Strahl should be hearing from the community with respect to those problems you've talked about?
Well, you know, number one, congratulations to Mark and to all the candidates. You know, just having been in that boat, when you put yourself out there, you really put yourself out there. So I'm very appreciative. I have really appreciated how Mark has actually reached out to the community to work on the issues of homelessness, mental health, and addiction. So I would encourage him to continue that. He sends a representative to the Housing Task Force. He actively participates with the Chilliwack Healthier Communities group. And so I think if he's going to fight on things, I think affordable housing is a huge issue for us across the spectrum. I'm not talking about just homelessness, but affordable housing for everybody, that middle group that can't get into rental under $1,000 a month, that kind of thing. I think our infrastructure, including public transit, but our infrastructure running from Chilliwack all the way to Langley, as I think you mentioned. It's been decades since we've done anything about that. So I think a plethora of those kind of issues, and we'll see what happens, but I think he needs to focus on a broad range of issues that are not either right or left. They're just right.
Yes.
They're morally right.
Yes.
Well, I think not a lot of people can connect the dots in terms of how the federal government impacts our life at a local level. I think there's a knowledge gap. A lot of people think the federal government is, Army, and they don't understand that federal health transfers make a huge difference in terms of how our health system functions in British Columbia. What would you, given the things we've talked about, what would be the message you'd say to Mark in terms of things this community would benefit from in terms of his leadership?
Yeah, I would echo some of what Diane said about housing. Like, I think that some of the problems we have with homelessness and stuff are partly because as prices got higher in Vancouver, it's driven people out here, which has then driven our house prices up. So, I mean, I know people who have jobs who've had to live at their parents' house for months because they couldn't find rentals that they could afford. So they're not poor. They're people with who have decent jobs and they still couldn't find a place to rent. So I don't know what people are supposed to do if they're working minimum wage, So we need affordable rentals. We also need people to be able to get into the market who maybe aren't as wealthy, right? So I know in Alberta, my sister-in-law bought into a place where it's a city property where they basically give you the down payment. You pay it as you're living there. You get your own mortgage. And then when you sell, you have to give the down payment back to the city before you take any profits out. So it's a way the prices are kept a little lower. So it's a way to have access to the actual owner's market for people who maybe don't have the down payment.
So maybe an expanded role for Canada Mortgage and Housing to play in the sector.
Because we are getting into a weird situation. I don't know how young people like my kids, my son is going to be 19 in January. He's just going to UVic now. He's paying $1,200 a month for renting a basement suite that's not super, super nice, right? And how is he ever going to be able to save up a down payment on a place that's $600,000? We're paying $1,200 a month in rent.
Yeah,
So.
I have kids that have decided to live in Vancouver, and it's a struggle, and they both are doing well, but home ownership is a stretch at this point for at least one of them. For sure. So the message to Mark seems to be, and this I hear this all over, Mark, you're doing a great job representing us in Ottawa, and I think that's got to be the message we'd like to continue him to have is, hey, we want our voices heard in Ottawa, and that's your job to do that.
Yeah,
and he seems to be doing that.
One of the other points, and this is more sort of a trickle-down issue, but the health transfers is a big issue. So, for example, there are 25,000 Chilliwack residents without a doctor, and that has significant consequences. Our emergency ward is bursting.
Yes.
And so, that's that's a provincial responsibility, but that comes from a health transfer. So we've been affected by the opioid crisis. And a lot of people don't know 36 people in Chilliwack last year died as a result of the opioid crisis. This is not a small Chilliwack 1950 kind of issue. This is a very serious issue.
The big city issue, and I know within the campaign I was following that issue particularly closely. As you know, the mayor appointed me to co-chair a task force in Chilliwack on some of those issues, and certainly I'm familiar with them. And we've talked to people and said, what can be done, and they feel, everyone says those health transfers and the amount that we're investing in our health is got to change it. It looks like we're going to wrap up now, and so I just want to say that we're going to Dawn first. So quickly over to Dawn, and then we'll be back at you.
Clint, again, just an update with the Liberals leading or elected in 155, as well as the Conservatives now at 121. Give you an interesting number again. We've been keeping an eye on popular vote and who has voted. The Conservatives so far, according to Elections Canada, with 3.7 million votes, the Liberals with 3.6 million. But it's the Liberals that will, along with the New Democrats, form a minority government. The NDP, by the way, with 1.6 million votes so far this evening. We are looking at Mark Strahl with a very comfortable lead as far as Chilliwack Hope with 5,400 votes, and right behind is the Liberal Kelly Valonis at 2,492 votes. Mission Matsqui, Brad V, fairly comfortable again here, 41% of the vote with 3,100 votes. That's 41 out of 179 polls reporting. Now, it's Jadis Sadu with 1,800 votes, the incumbent Liberal, and the NDP Michael Nen with 1,468. As far as Abbotsford goes, it is pretty much a runaway Edfast with almost 5,500 votes. And let me just update this. And the closest being the Liberal Seamus Heffernan at 2,685 votes, or 22.4% of the popular vote. Now, Vancouver Granville has taken another interesting turn. Guess who's now leading? Jody Wilson-Raybould. She now has 27, almost 28% of the vote. But here is where this is going to be literally down to the last poll. Jody Wilson-Raybould with 2,490 votes. The Conservative Jack Siegel, 2,291. And the Liberal Talib Noor Mohammed, 2,285. Basically, the Liberals have 25% of the vote. The Conservatives have 25% of the vote. Jody Wilson-Raybould, 27% of the vote. They're going to be counting that one for a while. Again, it is a Liberal minority government. For Chilliwack Hope, it's pretty much a shoe-in for Mark Strahl to be re-elected, and it's pretty much a shoe-in for Ed Fast to be re-elected in Abbotsford. But again, Vancouver Granville now, this one is still way too close to call. Back to the panel.
Thanks, Don. Thanks for that update. Wow, that's interesting. We'll be watching that, I think, into the wee hours. It won't change the big picture, but that'll certainly be an interesting. Another riding I hope we can get an update on is the resurgence of an old NDP campaigner back into the fold. Sven Robinson threw his hat into the ring for the NDP and got the nomination. And I'm curious to see how Sven is doing. Maybe we can throw that to Don, get an update for us in his next little report. So we've not seen any surprises in Chilliwack. No. I think things have gone pretty much the way we thought. Tell me what you thought about the let's leave Mark alone for now. Kelly Valanis is a brand new face for politics in Chilliwack. What were your thoughts on Kelly and the things she had to say? And do you think that's going to be a person we're going to see in the future in the political scene in Chilliwack?
Well, I think a note of congratulations to all the candidates. One thing I noticed, and maybe it's because the debates were controlled, but there wasn't mudslinging. I was at a number of those debates, and they were very concentrated on debating the issues. I felt Kelly did very well. I mean, it used to be, one thing that's really shifted here is that the Liberals used to be dead last all the time. And I believe she's in second position. Is she not now? Maybe, or is the NDP?
No,
I think
she's second position.
Now, that may be explained because it was not a local NDP candidate. But I think she ran a pretty strong campaign. She had good, I noticed her, I was at the Harvest restaurant a number of times, and there she was meeting with people. So I think they actually all did a pretty good job in terms of providing choice to voters in Chilliwack. So I was quite impressed with her.
And Willow, I'll get your take on the other candidates that were there. Heather McQuillan, who was you said you've met, and the other candidates. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say Kelly did run for school trustee, and I was campaigning with her. We were both endorsed by the BC Federation of Labor, so we talked to each other a lot. I handed out some of her pamphlets. I would have been thrilled for her to be on the school board, so I'm a big fan of Kelly personally. Heather McQuillan I really liked. I thought she went into politics for all the right reasons. I actually thought, even though a lot of people were criticizing her for running in a town she's not from, I thought, you know, to devote that many weeks of your life when you've got a new baby to like campaigning in a town just because you believe in the system is actually quite commendable. I like Dorothy Jean O'Donnell from the Marxist-Leninist. Wow, she's very smart. I love listening to her. I mean, obviously she's not, even she herself is like, well, I'm not going to win, but...
Well, she's very committed, and she's been there as long as I can remember. She throws her hat in, and
Arthur Green, I thought he did really well as well. I went to at least 3 of the debates, maybe 4, and I thought everyone did really well. Mark was very well spoken.
Now, I'm a little surprised that the Green Party didn't do better. And here's why I say that. When I follow the people I follow on social media, and I, read letters to the editor, and I'm plugged in, as they say, to politics in the community, there seems to be a real momentum around the environment, climate change, those things. I thought that they would do better, and I struggle to understand is it because people go, well, yeah, I'm really green, but I better vote this way because
I think that because we don't have proportional representation, there is still a bit of an aspect of strategic voting, and so I think both the NDP and the Green votes are suppressed by that, right? Because people felt like last time Louis DeJagger came in second, and so the Liberals might come in second again. If we're going to vote, we should try to vote for the person who has a chance. I mean, personally, I feel like Mark Strahl and the Conservatives are so strong here that you really should just vote your conscience, because I don't think it's very likely that one of those is going to win for a while. I think one day we'll be competitive, but
well, we've all been in elections, and we've all, well, you guys have lost. No, you've lost, but I haven't. You haven't lost. So it's, but what I think, and I think you have to remember, and I hope they'll all remember, is that every vote means something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every vote counts. It doesn't matter if you win or you come in second or you come in third. Every one of those votes means something. I remember having that discussion with members of my city council when they finished sixth. They still got elected, but they finished sixth, and they were kind of, well, I only got. And I said, you know what? Every vote is important, and once you're there, you have the same responsibility. If we got 2,000 votes or 5,000 votes, you hold the same responsibility. Same with school board, same with others. So. It's important. Those messages are important to Mark Strahl to look at those numbers and say, gee, I had 57% in 2011, and now I have 44%. Yeah. What do I do to build that back up?
Well, and some of it, though, may be this relationship to the national party. So, and that is, I mean, something I've talked about before is a rising tide carries all boats, right? So if you have a party on its way up, then you as a candidate will likely go up as well. You might not win, but you'll go up. And so you see that. So the, I mean, if you look nationally, the Liberals overperformed, the Conservatives underperformed, the NDP lost
10 seats.
10 seats. So, that's like 35% loss. I mean, they weren't wiped out. And the Greens, actually, if I had a party that quadrupled their seats, I'd be pretty happy about that.
I guess that's a way to look at it, yes.
So I think it tends to follow nationally, but it might also be part of a change in July. You never know.
Yeah, I have hope that agenda, I don't know if the Green Party is ready to govern, but I hope that agenda forms part of what the Liberals do, because I think when you look at it, the issue of our climate is a huge issue. Yeah. There are those that are arguing why it's happening, but the fact of the matter is it is happening, and it is something that really should get our attention. And I hope that that will be part of the outcome of this election, is that we'll pay some attention to
and
that.
As long as we do have the first past the post system, and as long as the Liberals do want to try to get majority governments under this system, they have to add things to their platform to try to get the NDP and Green votes, right? So it does actually keep, when they see, oh geez, I didn't get a majority this time, it definitely makes them have to reach out to progressive voters. So.
Well, I don't know about you, but I feel like this is going to be a good government.
Yeah,
I think the Liberals have learned from going from a majority to a minority that there are things that they need to improve. Yeah. The Conservatives have learned in not meeting expectations that they have to learn a few things as well. I don't know what to make of the bloc. Who knows what's going to happen? Yeah. It gives a stronger voice for Quebec in the Parliament, I suppose, but we'll wait and see. The NDP is been given a bit of a gift here to say some of our views are going to be represented, and the Green, same thing. I mean, those they'll have a little more influence. So I'm excited about what it's going to look like. I'm sure the Conservatives are disappointed, but I think the country is going to be the beneficiary of this.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how long the government lasts. So minority governments in Canada have traditionally not lasted more than 2 years. Actually, the most successful minority government was actually Stephen Harper government. Lasted some 957 days or something like that. So it can work. I think the last thing Canadians want to do is go back to the polls. And the last thing parties want to do is fund a national campaign. So there's a lot of, I think, impetus to try and make something work. And I hope they do, and I'll just put in a plug-in for my own philosophy. I hope when they get together, they don't break the bank, because some of the stuff that was promised in the campaign is not doable, not unless we want to bankrupt our kids or their kids.
That's for sure. Any last thoughts, Willow, before we vote it on?
I think I just echo what you say. I think, you know, when you look at those numbers and you look at the popular vote, the Liberals and the NDP together have almost 50% of the popular vote. If you add the Greens in, they do have 50%, right? So it's closer to being what the majority of Canadians want than if one of those parties had gotten a majority on their
We're
own.
getting close to proportional representation. You're almost happy.
Exactly.
Thanks. We're going to go to Don now, quickly.
Thanks, guys. And this is the final update. And on a national scale, the Liberals with 158 seats leading or winning, the Conservatives with 120, the Bloc 32, the New Democrats 24, the Greens with 3, and the Independents with 1. That Independent is not Jody Wilson-Raybould. We'll get to that in just a moment. As far as the leaders go, Justin Trudeau, Andrew Scheer, Elizabeth May have all been re-elected. Jagmeet Singh in Burnaby South is leading. He is expected to win. Maxime Bernier has lost to the Conservatives. He is out. Now, we were keeping an eye also on Sven Robinson and a comeback. Would there be one? Well, right now, he's hanging in there in Burnaby North Seymour. The Liberal Terry Beach has 6,400 votes, 37% of the popular vote. Sven Robinson is in second, but he is about 1,000 votes behind, 5,300, with almost 31% of the vote for the NDP. With the Fraser Valley ridings, it is almost fait accompli. Mark Strahl, we are calling as re-elected in Chilliwack Hope. As far as Abbotsford, Ed Fast, re-elected in Abbotsford. Brad V is now pulling away. The Conservative has 4,900, almost 5,000 votes. Jadis Sadhu not doing well, 24% of the vote, 2,862 votes. We will have another update on Thursday afternoon at 5 o'clock with chillTV's weekly News of the Week. And if there's something we should know about, you can always email us at news@chilltv.ca. And if you want to be a guest co-anchor, again, news@chilltv.ca. And for the final word, back to our panel.
Thanks very much, Don. Thanks for that update on Sven Robinson. Very interesting news to see he's almost made his comeback, but not quite. Diane, when you came on, you had a piece of paper I see down here that had the projections. What was projected? Why don't you go through those and we can see where we're at in the evening based on those projections?
Sure. So if you look at the numbers, the Liberals really outperformed in terms of what people thought they would do. They were projected to win 137 seats, and they have got 158. The Conservatives underperformed, but not by as much as might be, people might consider. There was a thought they would get 124 seats. They've got 121. I think the party that lost a fair amount, but will still have a lot of power in a minority situation, is the NDP. So they went from 44 seats down to 24 seats, and they were projected to win 35. So the Bloc, they were big winners, not quite as much as people thought. They got 32 seats, where they were projected to win 39. The Greens were projected to win 2 seats, and they won 3. I think actually maybe I thought 4, but 3. So they did fairly well. And it's a small number, but that's it's still, in terms of seats, fairly good for a party that's sort of just starting up. And the PPC, well, they struck out entirely.
Well,
so there you go.
The people have spoken. Willow, last word to you. How did this election meet your expectations? Is this where you thought it would be?
Yeah, I mean, I've been following the polls, and I was expecting a minority government, and I was hoping that it would be minority Liberal and not minority Conservative, and that's what we got, and I'm happy with that. So.
We like it when people are happy. We're going to be wrapping up now. We want to thank everybody that's watching. I know I've got people from across the country who I've told to watch, and they were watching, so that's great. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. You guys were amazing, and you made the whole show so much better. Thank you so much, and we will be back whenever there's another election.
Have a great night.
Ruby dear loves to walk in the rain. She could take a bus or train. She don't, but she won't explain. Oh, 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 and Ruby dear never did come to say why he would not stay. Ooh, that was just his way. She told me it's the hardest thing you will ever have to do. You forget about the one, oh, you forgot about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby dear, she gonna show up late. I know I just have to wait. I love her, that's my fate. She told me it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You forget about the one, oh, you forgot about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby dear, you make my heart sing. For you, I would do anything. Baby, why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring? Honey, why won't you wear my ring? Now I know it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You forget about the one, oh, you forgot about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby dear, you make my heart sing. For you, I would do anything. Baby, why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring?
Hello, welcome to Small Talk.
It's you I want to know, and the journey that brought you to this point today. Hey, Ruby dear loves to walk in the rain. Ruby dear loves to walk in the rain. She could take a bus or train. explain. Oh, 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 and Ruby's dear never did come to say why he would not stay. Oh, that was just his way. She told me it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You forget about the one, oh, who forgot about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby, yeah, she gonna show up late. I know I just have to wait. I love her, that's my fate. She told me it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You forget about the one, oh, who forgot about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby, yeah, you make my heart sing. For you, I would do anything. Baby, why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring? Honey, why won't you wear my ring? Now I know it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You forget about the one, oh, who forgot about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby, yeah, you make my heart sing. For you, I would do anything. Baby, why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring? Yeah, well, my side of the story goes something like this. I was minding my own business like I do, but she was cherry red and fine, born in 1959, white ball tires and a rag top roof. Lord, Lord, a T-bird with a rag top roof. Yeah, my face reflected pale in all of that shiny chrome for sale. Price tag of 45 large. I was thinking, well, hell, I got some jewelry I could sell. So I pulled out my old MasterCard. Lord, Lord, I slapped down my plastic on that car. And I slid behind the wheel, put that pedal to the steel, cruised out to the 401. Yeah, that leather tuck and roll surely satisfied my soul. I was having way too much fun, burning down a 401. His side of the story goes something like this. Well, he heard me out, but he was not pleased. Said a husband should have say in any major purchase made. Well, I just smiled and handed him the keys. Lord, Lord, one ride is worth 1,000 words from me. Yeah, and he slid behind the wheel, put that pedal to the steel, cruised out to the 401. Yeah, that leather tuck and roll must have satisfied his soul. We were having way too much fun, burning down the 401, burning down the 401. We slid behind such a horrible act. She then suggests instead that we find a cat. Well, who am I to argue that? Found a pretty little calico cat gone feral in the street. A pretty kitty cat, fast as a flash, shiny claws on her feet. She whispered to our mouse he need not fear. She was no threat, and she made that clear. But when he leaned in close so he could hear, she snapped his wee little neck, so insincere. My whining wife, she's the bane of my life. If not for her dead weight, I'd be alright. When she was young, her eyes, they shone so bright. Now she's dim as a dag on a sheep on a moonless night. She's never happy with her lot, not for a single thing she's got. I'd trade her in as soon as not find someone new to warm my cot. Now there's a new gray mouse in a house, sitting on my table, but not a rat or a cat or a spouse. I'm too unstable. It's not the mouse, the cat, or the aging wife. I find a flaw in every aspect of my life. Why should I look within to seek the truth? I'd rather point my finger, and now I blame you, and you, and you, and you, and you. Come ride with me on my Palomino, my amigo, go wherever the wind blows us, under the sun and over the snow. We will ride through all kinds of weather. Together we'll be happy forever. Just you and my pony and me. We don't need a saddle or a bridle to guide him. He will take us where we want to go, no matter how far. And when the sky is dark, we won't have to worry, my amigo. Goldie knows his way by heart back home to his barn. Come ride with me on my Palomino, my amigo. I'll take you where I go. In all of our days still to come, we will ride out to the calling horizon. You can just close your eyes when the light is too bright to behold. We don't need a saddle or a bridle to guide him. Come ride with me on my Palomino, Miami, go wherever the wind blows us, under the sun and over the snow. We will ride out to the calling horizon. You can just close your eyes when the light is too bright to behold. Giddy up, let's go. Ruby dear loves to walk in the rain. She could take a bus or train. She don't, but she won't explain. Oh, 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 and Ruby dear never did come to say why he would not stay. Ooh, that was just his way. She told me it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You forget about the one, oh, who forgot about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby, yeah, she gonna show up late. I know I just have to wait. I love her, that's my fate. She told me it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You forget about the one, oh, who forgot about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby, yeah, you make my heart sing. For you, I would do anything. Baby, why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring? Honey, why won't you wear my ring? Now I know it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You forget about the God about you. Oh, 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 and Ruby, yeah, you make my heart sing. For you, I would do anything. Baby, why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring? Why won't you wear my ring? Yeah, well, my side of the story goes something like this. I was minding my own business like I do, but she was cherry red and fine, born in 1959, white ball tires and a rag top roof. Lord, Lord, a T-bird with a rag top roof. Yeah, my face reflected pale in all of that shiny chrome for sale. Price tag of 45 large. I was thinking, well, hell, I got some jewelry I could sell. So I pulled out my old MasterCard. Lord, Lord, I slapped down my plastic on that car. And I slid behind the wheel, put that pedal to the steel, cruised out to the